This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10, a very good morning indeed to you. Still a little exuberant, actually, after last night's extraordinary victory. Do you know there were 50 teams in that news quiz that LBC triumphed in? 4 points clear at the end as well. Gary Lineker, who was the host of the event, was has some history when it comes to great results. He was really, really stunned that we managed to pull clear at the end. I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up. Well, it's not really a world exclusive because there's a camera pointing at me as I say this, but I managed to skid on some ice on the way into work this morning and come off my bicycle, and I landed on my head. Which, as many people have probably already realised, is good because, you know, wouldn't want to have hurt anything valuable or important. But there's a very slim chance I have a concussion. So if in the event of the next 2 or 3 hours you find yourself listening to something that you consider to be unfamiliar or a little bit unexpected, then that is, I'm getting my early excuse. I'm joking. I'm pretty sure I haven't got a concussion, but I have given my head a fair old whack. So if you are watching this on video, that is why I've got a plaster on my forehead. I asked Nick Ferrari for the first time in my life for sartorial advice. Would you believe? I said, what looks sillier, the hat or the plaster? He said, the hat. So here I am. Hat off, plaster on. Show underway. A quick shout to Paul. Paul got in touch quite early this morning. Paul was texting me at 10:01. Shall I read you the 3 texts that came in between 10:01 and 10:02 from Paul? The first one reads, he'll get the old left-right good night. The second one reads, then I'll turn around and roundhouse your block off. And the third one reads, wrong chat, sorry. So now everybody wants to know about the chat that Paul was actually engaged in, where he's threatening to roundhouse somebody and knock their block off. And of course, many people have already asked the question of how on earth will we be able to tell if there are some repercussions and side effects to the rather hefty knock on the head that you received this morning. Okay, back to business. The obvious story is JD Vance. Someone cleverer than me on Blue Sky yesterday wondered almost immediately after those comments emerged what the gaslighting rowback would look like. To be clear, JD Vance was commenting on plans to put an Anglo-French peacekeeping force on the ground in Ukraine, 20,000 British and French troops, which he then described in terms you would have heard already, but which I will remind you of shortly. When the impact of his words became clear, in fact, I think you could probably say when he began to realise the severity of what he had said and the impact of what he had said, he was left with little choice. He could either apologise, which these people, of course, are incapable of doing for reasons that we've discussed at some length, or he could claim that he hadn't said what we all heard him say. He could claim that when he was discussing the plausibility of an Anglo-French peacekeeping force of 20,000 British and French troops being deployed on the ground in Ukraine, he wasn't actually talking about Britain and France. And, of course, if you've been listening to this programme for the last couple of weeks, you'll have picked up on that moment of doublespeak, whether deliberate or not, but to move in moments from saying one thing to claiming that you had never said it. There was a distillation of this phenomenon in the Oval Office on Friday, wasn't there, when Trump was asked about his description of Zelensky as a dictator. And Trump responded, of course, by expressing scepticism that he ever could have said such a thing. And these moments are really important. They're funny on one level. They're a little bit chilling on another, a little bit ridiculous on yet another level. But they're really important because they describe the denigration of truth. They describe the dismantling of objective reality. My goodness me, Orwell was good, wasn't he? I know we all reference him too often, and I know sometimes he's not the author that you should be turning to, and I know an awful lot of the people, particularly online, who cite George Orwell have clearly never read a word he wrote, except possibly a couple of slogans about Big Brother. But doublespeak, this tool in the dictator's armoury, this weapon of oppression, this ability to actually destroy the meaning of language itself, is unfolding in plain sight. You know, I think it began with Kellyanne Conway and the alternative facts narrative. But I don't think we realised even then just what the next stage would look like. It looks like a throwaway comment for Donald Trump. Oh, I can't believe I would have said something like that. And everybody laughs because everybody in the room is now more or less hand-picked. But of course, it means that nothing he ever says has agency. He can't be held to anything that he ever says because tomorrow he might say the opposite. And that is why the JD Vance story, scandal, episode, immediately claiming that his comments had somehow been misinterpreted, but it's not bothering any parsnips anywhere except, oddly, in what passes for Kemi Badenoch's brain. James Cleverly, the former Foreign Secretary, was unequivocal in his condemnation. Foolish and insulting throwaway remark, hurtful and thoughtless. Kemi Badenoch, incredibly, sought to defend it, but it turns out that they're great friends. Even Farage put the boot in, although I think he probably had very little choice. He's probably hoping that no one digs out the footage of him describing how he's been best pals with JD Vance for over a decade. Unlucky, mate. We'll be playing that a little later in the programme. But I'll tell you where it led me. It led me somewhere I don't really want to go. It led me to the thought that we're all engaged in a bit of a pantomime at the moment. I don't think it's deliberate. I don't know if you heard Angela Rayner being interviewed yesterday, where she was unable really to answer any questions because you can't answer any questions. Imagine I handed you a sack full of ferrets, right? And I asked you what you were going to do to persuade the ferrets to behave. Or I asked you what tools you had in your arsenal that would allow you to exert some influence on the ferrets fighting in a sack. That's why Angela Rayner couldn't really answer any questions yesterday, because the British government could lay out a policy position and Donald Trump could defecate all over it 1 hour later, and yet they have to stay, to quote that wonderful musical Hamilton, they have to stay in the room where it happens. I think that Keir Starmer is doing what he needs to do, knowing that he's doomed to fail. Well, that's a real moment, isn't it? Politically, diplomatically, even, I think, historically. Keir Starmer is doing what he needs to do, knowing that he's doomed to fail. Because what JD Vance said yesterday was, I think, really, really hideous. For a foreign politician to malign the military service, let alone the sacrifice of every member of the military who has served in the last 30 or 40 years in such a crass and obnoxious way, someone who's never seen proper active service and, of course, works as vice president for a man who actually dodged the draft. I'll say that again, he dodged the draft. It's another moment of... Is it doublespeak or newspeak in 19... I need to read it yet again, don't I? It's another moment, of course, because they were trying to attack Zelensky for the fact that Ukraine has conscription. And, of course, the United States had conscription. It had military service. You were called up. It had the draft. Unless you were rich and you could deploy doctors and lawyers and the rest of it, you had to go to Vietnam and quite possibly die in the service of your country in a war that they ultimately lost. That's the last war that America fought on its own, was Vietnam, and they lost. But that doesn't stop JD Vance maligning the military service of every member of the British military who served in the last 30 or 40 years, let alone the ones who made the ultimate sacrifice. So the doublespeak comes when they condemn Zelensky for conscription without mentioning the draft. It comes when Vance condemns Britain and France for not being significant military forces, haven't fought any proper wars, and the only war they fought on their own, they lost. The United States of America remains the only country in history to trigger Article 5 of NATO, which means that every NATO ally was engaged in the deployments in Afghanistan. And that was a moment of such unutterable obnoxiousness that we haven't actually got the vocabulary properly to chronicle it. We can all spit our dummies out, or we can all spit nails or feathers or whatever it is that you spit. We can all, I think quite rightly, reflect upon how this would have gone down with military families. One of the early texts that I got yesterday was from a 21-year-old lad describing his dad's response. His dad has tours under his belt where he was doing a lot more than writing press releases, which is what, as far as I can tell, JD Vance's military service consisted of. I apologise, the Australians fought in Vietnam as well, didn't they? But the last war they fought without us, they lost. But what the Vance moment brought home to me was the possibility that nothing Keir Starmer does matters. In the context of controlling or influencing Trump. That's why I say he's doing what he has to do, but he knows he's doomed to fail. So those photographs of Starmer in Downing Street for a meeting that had already been scheduled, but I don't think they were expecting Justin Trudeau to turn up, or possibly a couple of other dignitaries and leaders, senior politicians. The pictures were reassuring. The sight of Keir Starmer chairing the meeting, for those of us who are under no illusions about how stupid Brexit was, it was quite a nice reminder of what a unified Europe looks like. But what possible leverage does Keir Starmer have? And oddly, the thing that made me think of that was JD Vance's comments yesterday, because what can we do? What can we do? By we, I mean the British establishment, the British government. What can we do? King Charles is going to have to shake that man's hand at some point, you know. King Charles's son was on active duty in Afghanistan. He's going to have to shake the hand of a man who says we haven't been involved in any wars for 30 or 40 years. There's nothing we can do. There's no send back the ambassadors or diplomatic incident. It probably doesn't reach that threshold. But in terms of how offended you are and how offended I am, there is absolutely nothing we can do. There is no consequence. The only reason why he's tried to row back on it is just to sort of make it go away, to avoid brouhaha. He's not trying to avoid punishment. He's not trying to avoid consequence. He only put it on Twitter. He didn't even bother giving an interview or making an actual apology. And of course, he hasn't even apologised. He's lied. He's done newspeak. He's lied about what he actually said. He's claimed that when he was talking about a peacekeeping force consisting of British and French troops, he wasn't actually talking about Britain and France. He was talking about unspecified random other countries. But any country in NATO that responded to the triggering of Article 5 came to the aid of the United States when they went to Afghanistan. And I think the thing I'm frightened of saying out loud to you this morning is that none of this matters. None of this matters. Not in the context of being able to apply a brake or exert influence on Donald Trump. None of this matters. He's going to do whatever the heck he wants, regardless of what anybody else says or anybody else does or anybody else counsels. I am an admirer of Keir Starmer, historically, and I think he's had a really good week. The speed with which his diplomatic success in the Oval Office fell apart was desperately unlucky, but not exactly unpredictable, was it? For somebody to have said on Thursday, in fact, listen, I'm not blowing my own trumpet. I've just remembered that I did say on Thursday this could all have fallen apart by Friday tea time. And lo and behold, it all fell apart by Friday tea time after that hideous punishment beating of Volodymyr Zelensky. So the question I want to ask you is whether or not all of the ministrations, all of the front pages, all of the meetings, all of the hand-wringing, all of the considered diplomatic analyses, does any of this matter at all? Is anybody anywhere capable of exerting any influence whatsoever upon Donald Trump? Are we living a form of pantomime? We're not being conned by Keir Starmer, but there's a sort of delusion of which we are all part. We are behaving, and I don't know whether it's normality bias, but we are behaving as if business as usual is underway, as if Tony Blair could sit with George W. Bush and stay his hand, you know, better to be in the tent than outside it. We actually do have some agency in that meeting, and I think we did. I think most historians, most critics would agree that Blair was a junior partner in a real partnership. I don't think any of this matters. I don't think any of this matters. 17 minutes after 10 is the time. That's my question for you. When you look at what JD Vance said yesterday, his hideous comments about British troops, about British military history, and his subsequent lies, and you realise that there's not actually anything we can do about it. We can't rescind the invitation for the state visit. We can't tell Donald Trump that he's welcome, but he has to leave JD Vance at home. We don't have any leverage or power, and that's soft power. It's a conversation we had last week, isn't it? At all. And I don't know what that means, but I want to know whether you agree. Are we all engaged in some sort of diplomatic pantomime that is the only thing we know how to do, but which is utterly pointless because the President of the United States of America is like nothing that we have ever seen before? You look me in the eye and tell me that you think Keir Starmer can whisper in his ear and stop him from doing something. I've shifted from thinking you want to be the last person that he spoke to, but someone else will be the next person. You can't be the last person that he spoke to. I used to think that was clever. Starmer, very clever, last person that he spoke to. But you can't be the last person that he spoke to because he's going to speak to somebody next. After he's announced the thing that he's announced as a consequence of you being the last person that he spoke to, he's going to speak to somebody else and announce something different. And announce something completely different. Can Keir Starmer do anything in this context? 0345 6060 973. I hate this, and I hope you understand where this question is coming from. But are we all kidding ourselves that the United Kingdom has a role to play in the peace process, in the American administration, full stop, on the world stage that is currently dominated by Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping? Was the Kremlin right when they talked about Europe having been hobbled, having been ended, if you like, as a viable political force? So there you go. Look, that's a big one. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. The question underneath all that pontification is pretty straightforward. Does Keir Starmer have any leverage whatsoever in his dealings with the White House? Does Keir Starmer have any meaningful influence whatsoever, given what we know about Donald Trump and what the comments of JD Vance yesterday showed us our hand looks like? Vice President of the United States of America has committed the cardinal sin, the unthinkable sin of insulting our military dead, and there's nothing we can do about it. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:23, and it is a question that I don't really want to ask, but when I thought about what we can do, and I'm going to use we very loosely to describe a country that feels quite unified at the moment in the context of Ukraine, I thought about what can we do to punish or caution or make JD Vance understand the horror of what he said yesterday about our fallen, about our troops, about our military. And I realised that we can't do anything. And then I found myself thinking, well, if we can't do anything about that, maybe we can't do anything about anything. Have a little listen to the Vance clip and then we'll hit the phones.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country and ensure that America has a long-term interest. You're not going to do that if you come to the Oval Office, insult the president, and refuse to follow his plan for peace.
Two things. I mean, there's the insult to the British and French military, and then there's the saying the quiet bit out loud. You've got to make it worth our while. We've got to be able to turn a profit. We paid back loans after the Second World War. We only finished paying them about 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But for him to say out, do you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of COVID. I know that sounds weird, but Carol Vorderman and I have spoken on a few occasions about how utterly unprepared we were for the fact that when COVID began, when the scale of the threat that COVID posed to the population became clear, a lot of people, mostly associated with the Conservative Party, just saw pound signs. The rest of us saw tragedy. People would be ringing me saying, I don't know how, I've got ventilators, I don't want paying. Do you know what I mean? That's how most of us would have been, I think. I do believe that. But an awful lot of people saw pound signs. But you're not supposed to say it out loud. And oddly, I was reading about the the odds of getting a contract from the government if you were in that VIP lane of friends and cronies versus the likelihood of getting a contract from the government if you weren't in that VIP lane of friends and cronies. Just as I was trying to make sense of what happened with JD Vance yesterday, and I think there's something in it. He's admitted that we just see pound signs. We've got no humanitarian interest, no moral interest, no Pax Americana motivation here. If you make it worth our while, then maybe we'll help you resist Putin. And I don't even believe that they would do that either. As I said to you yesterday, I think they want to get their hands on the minerals before they throw Zelensky under a bus, which is why they wouldn't commit to security guarantees while they were telling him that he had to hand over the family jewels. Anyway, Neil's in Chorley. Neil, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I was going to bring up the subject of the independent nuclear deterrent, which is all tied up with what's going on at the moment. Now, as you may be aware, we have 4 Vanguard-class submarines based up in Faslane, Scotland.
Yes.
And one of them is always at sea on what they call the CASD, the Continuous At-Sea Deterrent. And that's been the case since 1969. There's always one submarine with up to 16 missiles.
Yes.
Now, those missiles are Trident missiles, as you're probably aware. Now, we own the submarines, and we own the bangy bits on top of the Trident missiles, but we don't
Is that a technical term, Neil?
It is,
Thank you.
the warheads.
Yes. I've got some bangy bits on my head this morning, but that's a story for another day. That's a story for kicked in the head by a horse. So, sorry, go on. So we own the bangy bits, as in the warheads.
We own the warheads, and they're periodically serviced down in Wiltshire.
Right.
Using a special convoy. So we own the submarines, we own the warheads, but we don't own the actual missiles upon which the warheads sit.
I see.
And they are serviced periodically by the Americans. So what would happen if Trump, on a whim, decided to withdraw that support? Because at the moment we are building 4 brand new submarines to go into service in the 2030s, all built around the Trident missile system.
Sounds like a field of expertise for you. Can we fire them at the moment without America's permission, right?
That's correct, yeah. But every time a submarine comes in off CASD, my understanding is that the missiles are lifted out the submarine, serviced by the Americans. The warheads may or may not be taken off to be serviced by us. But the actual missiles, the propellant on board...
And this just adds to the sense that we cannot land a single finger on him in any meaningful diplomatic, military or political context.
Correct, yeah. I think we spend something like a third of our defence budget on the submarine service.
Wow.
So, if we lose that, then what have we got, really?
And the days of thinking, he'd never go there, he'd never do that. You could easily imagine him giving a throwaway speech or a throwaway comment to the press, to the sycophantic press pack about maybe we'll have a look at their submarines or something. Do you know what I mean? Maybe we'll have a look at those missiles. Nice missiles you got there. Nice missiles you got there. Be a shame if something happened to them. So
exactly that.
So are we in a form of pantomime? And I don't mean to criticise anybody. I don't think Keir Starmer is pulling the wool over his own eyes, but I wonder if even he is caught up in a delusion of relevance.
Yes, we are caught up in a pantomime, I believe.
Wow.
We've got to appease the Americans. They're so powerful. We are entirely reliant on them. The submarine service, as I've just explained, is completely reliant on the Americans.
And you've explained it very well. So if we were to turn around, all we've got is carrot. We've got no stick. So we can offer him a state visit. We can tickle his toes. We can try and persuade Zelensky to hand over more of the family jewels in Ukraine. But we've got no stick. Did we ever have a stick? Well, if you think about, how we spend our defence budget, if I'm correct in what I'm saying, that a third goes on these missiles, then they're never going to be used in reality, are they? It's going to be end of civilization when we do use them, because all they can do is flatten the Russian cities, and we would use them as a weapon of last resort when our cities are being flattened. We haven't got any sort of scalability in our weapon systems. It's like having a tool bag, and the only tool in that bag is a lump hammer. Yes, I mean I'm a big fan of analogies, and that's a brilliant, albeit chilling one, because that idea that when you have a proper ally in the White House, then our lack of leverage doesn't matter because we are united. We've got their tool bag as well. Their tool bag is at our service. Our tool bag is at their service. Theirs just happens to be 100 times the size of ours. And if you haven't got an ally in the White House, the relationship between Westminster and the White House is the same as the relationship between Westminster and the Kremlin. There's nothing we can do to stay the hand of Vladimir Putin any more than there is much we can do to stay the hand of Donald Trump. This is a really chilling moment For me, at least, some of you, Neil included perhaps, will have already arrived at this point. But when you watch the telly, when you look at the photographs, when you read all the very expert and informed analysis, none of it, as far as I can tell, makes the point that the unique nature of Donald Trump means that all of these old tropes and traditions are as nothing. They're just they're seeds in the wind. I hope I'm wrong, and if I am, you're going to ring me on 0345 60973 and explain as clearly and as articulately as Neil just did why I'm wrong, because I don't want you to ring me and tell me why I'm right. Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Okay, so here's a really good illustration of why we're probably wrong to be reaching for the traditional toolbox in our dealings with Donald Trump, okay? Do you think that he would have suspended aid to Ukraine regardless of what happened in the Oval Office on Friday? You don't know, do you? You've got no idea. So traditionally, you'd be able to read the runes. You'd have had back channels open. You'd have had diplomatic insights. You'd have had cooperation between allies so that the junior ally had a clear idea of what the senior ally was likely to do. But you've got no idea. And Keir Starmer's got no idea. Emmanuel Macron's got no idea. Nobody's got any idea at all of whether or not what appeared to be a staged and manufactured contretemps in the Oval Office last Friday, it was the reason why Donald Trump suspended aid to Ukraine over the course of the weekend. If I had to put money on it, I'd say it didn't matter a jot. I'd say it was all theatre. They were always going to withdraw aid to Ukraine because the only thing you can say with any certainty at all is that whatever Donald Trump does, it will delight Vladimir Putin. But that's a really helpful way of understanding what I'm trying to convey in the context of all normality being busted, being broken, no longer applying. It's not just the newspeak. It's not just the denigration of objective reality and truth. It's also the absolute inability to apply any form of critical thinking or analysis. And that's the proof right there. Do you think he would have suspended aid to Ukraine if the meeting in the Oval Office had gone better? Can't even say that because the meeting in the Oval Office was choreographed to go that badly. Some people over there saying, I think Zelensky could have behaved a little bit more graciously. I think Zelensky could have behaved a little... No, he couldn't. Because they decided before he walked into the room how that meeting was going to end. But did they know before he walked into the room that they'd be withdrawing aid for... You see what I mean? So what's Starmer doing? What can he do? We're just not ready yet as a population, as a homogenous force, as a Europe. We're just not ready yet to say we've got nothing. We've got nothing. He is an ally, as Sir Bill Browder said to me yesterday. He is an ally of Vladimir Putin, which means he's our enemy. Richard's in Cardiff. Richard, what do you reckon?
What annoys me is you've got a president and vice president. First of all, Donald Trump said in the Arlington Cemetery that people who die in war are losers.
Yeah.
So obviously, you've got a commander-in-chief who's, literally degrading all the people who fought in Vietnam, in the Second World War and everything else.
Do you remember the Gold Star soldier's family, the family of the Gold Star soldier who died, and he insulted his parents?
That's right. He said they're all losers.
Yeah.
And, when you've got a man in charge of a country like that, you can't win. He's a businessman. He's not a leader.
He's not a businessman. He's not a businessman. I think we need to nip this in the bud. He's a rubbish business. He's been bankrupt 6 times. People say he's transactional. He's not transactional because he never keeps his word. He never keeps to a deal. So he's the opposite of transactional. Yeah. He's a chess-playing pigeon.
I agree with what's been said, that Vladimir Putin is laughing at the fact that all this is happening because you can't trust Putin. No matter what you do, he's going to invade again. And if obviously America doesn't sort of do anything and sort of go against Putin, Biden wasn't as good as he should have been, but you're not going to do anything with Putin because all he wants is Russia back. He wants the USSR back again. That's what he wants. That's his aim.
And the rest. I don't know. Someone said yesterday, I don't even know he'd be happy restoring those previous borders. Yeah. So what about this idea? And I want to stress, it's not a critique of Keir Starmer. I don't think Keir Starmer can do anything else yet.
No.
But he can't actually do anything. He can't actually exert any influence. He has no leverage. He has carrots, as we saw when he visited the Oval Office, but he has no sticks. Europe has no sticks.
I know. It's unfortunate that we haven't got the force we used to have.
Yes.
Well, we could say to hell with America. We're going to go in anyway. I just don't know the answer. The only answer is for the American people to get together and get rid of Trump and put somebody in who's got more clout, who's more of a diplomat than what.
Yeah, well, you know what happens if anything happens to Trump.
Yeah.
JD Vance becomes president, so be careful what you wish for, Richard, and I know you know that. The Telegraph has a really good sort of behind-the-scenes account of everything that happened today, and it still misses. It still speaks to a world in which the UK Prime Minister could bend the ear of the United States President. The nearest thing we come to a win is that Keir Starmer apparently got an early heads up that the aid was going to be paused, so he could then take charge of coordinating a European response. But there's no suggestion at all that despite days of trying, that European leaders could have made any dent at all in Trump's determination to suspend it. And of course, they also write as if it was the consequence of the damage dealt by that public spat. And I don't think anyone can say that with confidence either. I just don't, because if I say to you, would he have done it anyway? You don't know the answer. Thank you, Richard. Daniel's in Derby. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
Hi. I'm still stuck on your are we living in a pantomime proposition. And, to be honest with you, I don't think it's the realisation that we suddenly are living in a pantomime. I think that the Donald Trump administration has pulled the veil off the fact that we've always been living in a pantomime. I mean, a lot of the things that happen diplomatically when it comes to geopolitics are cosmetic, and what happens behind the scenes are different things. For instance, if we look at the Iraq war and Afghanistan war, didn't Colin Powell stand up in front of the Senate and sort of practically lie to people about weapons of mass destruction, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I don't want to relitigate that. I'm not being dismissive, I promise, because I do think that Tony Blair, albeit he was a junior partner, I do think most people recognise that he did have some influence on George W. Bush. I tell you what it was, he may not have had sticks or carrots, but there was a degree of mutual respect there, and there were things that George W. Bush perhaps couldn't have done without the support of Tony Blair, without the support of the UK government. So that it's more the shift from that paradigm that I'm interested in today, into a paradigm where the President of the United States of America is interested in the good wishes and the approval of nobody except Vladimir Putin. And that is, I still think that's an impossible reality for most of us to process. Whereas the reality you describe, I don't think is unfamiliar to people. I think that's the old imperfections, but imperfections on a semblance of normality. We're now in a world of abnormality.
Yes. That's if you consider that Tony Blair had an influence, because it turns out that he kind of lied and misled us. This is the pantomime I'm talking about.
Well, you're relitigating the weapons of mass destruction dossier again, which is not, is it? Because we knew about that, and we knew at the time that embellishments or exaggerations had been put in place. The BBC was reporting on what was going on. So it's not, I mean, respectfully, we're comparing apples with pears. That wasn't a pantomime. I'm not going to say, you say it's a pantomime. I'm saying, oh, no, it isn't. But it's a completely different proposition. Because what does a journalist do in this case? In the case you described, the journalist can speak to Dr. David Kelly. The journalist can get to the bottom of who put together the dossier, whether the threat is real, what Hans Blix thinks about it, what's being found on the ground in Iraq. I mean, that we are in the universe of agreed reality, even if someone is lying about it or exaggerating it or embellishing it. The universe I'm trying to describe is one where there is no agreed reality. It's one where up is down. It's one where he calls Zelensky a dictator on a Friday and expresses skepticism that he ever could have said such a thing on a Tuesday. It's one where JD Vance can insult British and French troops in the morning and claim he said no such thing in the afternoon, in the evening. It's more about what we could point to as British power, European power. What would you point to? Show me what you've got. Okay, Donald Trump has got all his weapons on display, his rhetorical weapons, his propaganda weapons, the support of the Kremlin. He's got it all on display. The money, the tariffs, all of it. What have we got? What have we got? Members of the European Union got rather more than the United Kingdom does, but probably still because we have been destabilised. Looking back on the decision to help destabilise Europe by voting to leave the European Union, if Putin has run out of champagne this week, if the Kremlin cellars have run dry this week, God knows what they were like in 2016. They were probably reduced to drinking pomade because the champagne had been so swiftly dispatched. It's coming up to 11:15. The question is a grim one, but at the moment, a question that has created consensus. We're sitting here doing what we always do. There's a picture in the paper of the king on the deck of a big ship, and HMS something or other, and HMS Prince of Wales, and normal service, business as usual. And Keir Starmer's on the phone to the American president and the American but none of it matters because he's going to do whatever the hell he wants to do, or, and this is the conversation we had yesterday, whatever the hell Vladimir Putin wants to do. So is this a pantomime, but not the pantomime that you described, the pantomime that I described? It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:47, and it is a question I wish I hadn't thought of, let alone asked you, because it gathers in heft the longer the conversation goes on. I'm looking at the newspapers, I'm turning the pages, I'm looking at the socials, I'm clicking on my inbox, but why? None of it makes the blindest bit of difference. Donald Trump is going to do whatever Donald Trump wants to do, or, marginally worst case scenario, he's going to do whatever Vladimir Putin wants him to do. Tell me I'm wrong. Liz is in Cricklade. Liz, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. You've almost worked it out, haven't you? That the pantomime actually began with making a mockery out of democracy, with lies and misinformation, getting people to vote against their own interests, with culture wars. And really what we have is the reality, or facing the reality, that he is behind us and that really we are a vassal state of America. We were protected from being in the EU. We had, power within that body. And now we've lost all control. And it is America first, and we're coming to terms with that. I came to terms with this some time ago because Brexit for agriculture always meant giving in to American food,
to American interests, to the big lobbies and the tinned chicken and the antibiotic ridden cows and all that sort. Well, I don't. I just, and I know that's very much your field of expertise, but that was going to happen to an America led by somebody who isn't unhinged or psychopathic. So there has to be something about Trump that is unique, that changes the relationship. Whether it was ever special or not, I don't know. But you could bend the ear of previous presidents. If we'd undertaken a trade deal or a trade negotiation, you could have had give and take. You could have had quid pro quo. There would have been diplomacy. There would have been soft power. I don't think any of this applies to Trump.
I think that, you're looking at a party, the Republican Party has allowed Trump to come back in again, knowing full well what he did before. Steve Bannon has been clear about his desire for world war for, some considerable time, because America wants to dominate, and it's been threatened by China rising in power, and that's what it wants.
So Keir Starmer is...
We are literally, we are facing reality of thinking there was a better world outside the European Union. America, particularly Republicans, hate the European Union because the single market offers a buffer to stop us being dominated by the USA.
And a competitor.
It was obvious for some, and a competitor, and we were getting bigger within and more powerful within the European Union, yes. But we left. Now we are powerless, and we are, to all intents and purposes, you don't need to militarily invade a country now, as we are seeing. It was done through a referendum where lies were missold.
I think you deserve some sort of award. I am perilously close, for the very first time in history, certainly in the history of this programme. I'm perilously close to telling somebody to stop bringing it all back to Brexit, which would be the absolute height of hypocrisy for me, as I know you know.
It doesn't all go back to Brexit,
of course.
As your previous caller showed. There's plenty that's gone on before, but for us, losing control happened with Brexit because we were no longer within the protection of the European Union. And so Keir Starmer is a puppet, yes.
And how compromised do you think the European Union is as a force by the fact that we're no longer in it? Because we never really look down that end of the telescope, do we? Because we're busy on this side of the channel.
Well, we've always had this NATO thing with America, and as your other callers heard about the missiles and so forth, which isn't my area of expertise, but they've had a grip on Europe, but we did have a way of actually fending off America with with the single market, which actually Margaret Thatcher invented, or, was at the heart of inventing. So the same is with which side of the car do you drive on, or, a systems thing. It's about systems, and America doesn't want to cede control to anyone else. And we're a very small country who used to have an empire, and that empire is getting, it's gone, but we did have a few pockets left, but even that's gone now because Chagos Island's gone. What's going to happen with Gibraltar? Goodness only knows.
I can't have to tell you to cheer up. I mean, that was such a bleak analysis, but again, that would be me scaling dizzy heights of hypocrisy. Liz, thank you. And I agree with Liz, and I don't know that we'll ever be able to really start the business of fixing things until we acknowledge that Brexit was another dream, another Kremlin dream come true. It's funny how many of these things knit together, isn't it? You've got JD Vance maligning the British military. You've got the country, the United Kingdom, out there alone now in a frightening new world. You've got a European Union destabilised by our departure and by the online radicalised right-driven rise of the far right. So you've got a character like JD Vance right in the middle of it, a man reputed to be in the pockets of the like of Elon Musk and another sort of shadowy billionaire called Peter Thiel. And it's odd, isn't it, how some British people appear to have been at the very heart of this process for a very long time.
I think you've got the photographs of me with JD Vance.
Yeah, yesterday. So you also met with a team around JD Vance.
I met with JD. Now, I've known JD since 2012. I knew him way before he was getting into politics. He's a friend of mine. I spent quite a lot of time with him. And, I've known him for 14 years. Kemi Badenoch's known him for a fortnight. Nobody in the Labour Party knows him at all.
There's a picture now of JD Vance before meeting you, Nigel Farage.
Slightly different style of photograph, I have to say.
Funny that. 2012. Why would a fringe British politician who was about to be propelled to enormous prominence by a project beloved of the Kremlin, why would a fringe British politician like that be knocking about with JD Vance into it? Maybe they just went fishing together or something. In 2012. Curiouser and curiouser. Al's in Glasgow. Al, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. I think we have to assume that Trump always intended to withdraw support from Ukraine. It's following last year when he delayed support, the $80 billion support package, which delayed the counteroffensive. He's also withdrawn US aid, all that kind of stuff. So it follows a pattern. And it also goes against Trump's... he's trying to portray himself as being a peacemaker, where he's in practice actually completely the opposite.
Well, this is actually quite an interesting area that you've led us into, because, I mean, he's not a pacifist, as you could see with regard to what he is prepared to let Israel do to Gaza. So, but he doesn't seem to... I don't think he's a hawk. I think he's in favour of annihilation as opposed to attritional warfare. Do you see what I mean? I mean, I think the missiles got sent to Syria during his first administration. I don't know that he is. I don't think he's a warmonger, actually, in the way that some other Republican presidents have been.
I don't think he's an anything. I don't think he...
No, you're right.
I think, actually, I'm going to quote Nick Abbott. Good. Think in terms of what Donald Trump would do.
Yeah.
And I can see that the next extension of what he has done by withdrawing support is, and I don't want to freak you out, could he arm Russia and support them in the field? So...
I mean, you have freaked me out. And, this is what I was trying to describe earlier about the toolbox of normality So if I were to reach now for my toolbox of normality, I'd affectionately tease you. I'd say, oh, come on, mate, take your tinfoil hat off. Let's not get carried away. But that is what I was trying to convey all morning, is that you cannot say with certainty that Trump will not or will do anything.
Yeah, we're just one step away from that. And so I think, coming back to a point you made earlier about Starmer, I think you said that Starmer is doomed to fail.
Yes.
But he's being quite canny, and I think he's doing what he has to do.
I agree. He's doing what he has to do, but he is doomed to fail.
Yeah, but I think that really when I say EU, the other allies, including us, Canada, Turkey, and all of the other...
That's sort of NATO without the A, as it were. Oh, that's Atlantic, isn't it? Not America, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
I think we really need to get on the front foot rather than following what the US is doing.
I think that goes, I think that is an absolute certainty. Do you, while I have you, because I asked a few people this question yesterday, but I sense you weren't listening, do you know why we were told in the run-up to the Brexit referendum that a European army was an absolutely terrible thing that we couldn't countenance under any circumstances whatsoever? Because it seems like a very odd position to have adopted now, looking back, doesn't it?
I think our enemies, if you like, are just trying to undermine EU. And Europe as a whole. I just don't want it to become better organised and stronger.
Well, you're describing our enemies. I'm thinking of all the British politicians who queued up and the British commentators who queued up to tell us that a European army would be disastrous and that it would be an absolutely terrible thing. I couldn't get them off the phone in 2016, 2017. It was one of the only things they had left when Brexit started falling apart. Well, at least we're not part of a European army. What would have been wrong with that? Because I've got a feeling we're going to be soon anyway.
I can see there being pros and cons with that to a degree, but I can't see there being a single entity European army.
No, of course.
But what I can see, somebody last night was describing that, well, Europeans can coordinate. We already do through NATO. We already have
and
processes.
You have an evolved NATO, an ETO, if you like, or a EUTO, or ETO. I mean, whatever it might, because of course it's also got Canada and Australia and, as you say, other countries in it as well. But I can't get past that. It's a real lump of gristle for me in my attempts to understand things. Is that the rhetorical reasoning behind people like JD Vance's very close old friend Nigel Farage telling us that a European army would be a bad thing, when, as Al points out, that's exactly what enemies of this country would want us to believe, because in the event of us needing an alternative to reliance upon the United States of America, we wouldn't have one. And here we are. And that is why we are where we are. Extraordinary. So you can sell it as over-reliance on the United States of America, which is true, but you can also sell it as a degree of pussyfooting around when it came to rearming and revivifying and reuniting Europe. And what did Ursula von der Leyen have at the very top of her plan for Europe yesterday? Rearming. We are in an era of rearmament. Goodness me. I know I can tell you this. I know you'll understand it when I tell you. But there must be a German word for it. Simultaneously finding the conversations that we are having absolutely fascinating. I mean, truly fascinating and helpful, while also wishing to Betsy that we didn't have to have these conversations at all.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know. I mean, it does happen occasionally, doesn't it? When it feels, to me at least, that you can't really countenance talking about anything else except the unfolding saga, the unfolding scenario involving the United States, Ukraine and Russia, and of course the bigger, well not bigger, but the broader questions thrown up by the utterly transformed nature of the relationship between those three seats of power, Westminster or London, the White House or Washington, and then Russia or the Kremlin. Absolutely extraordinary to reflect upon how that balance has shifted. I mean, truly extraordinary. Who now, honestly, and listen, I think this applies with a few really mutton-headed exceptions who are so far down the online far-right radicalization that even their mothers don't recognize them anymore, I reckon anybody would answer the same to the question of who do you think has more influence on Donald Trump, the Kremlin or our parliament, our prime minister? Who do you think has a greater access to the ear of Donald Trump, or who do you think is going to be more delighted about the? So I suppose if you're down that far right rabbit hole, then you'll think it's the right thing to do, won't you? You'll think that like that woman at jury service that I keep telling you about, who was adamant that Volodymyr Zelensky has stolen all the money himself and spent it all on yachts and things. And you know, I see what gets picked up from Twitter by other people, and sometimes posted on Blue Sky, which is the only platform I'm using at the moment. And, you know, Elon Musk is in that zone. So how rude can you be? How condescending can you be about a woman in Hounslow who believes all this bilge when Elon Musk believes it too? And you know, the stuff about Michelle Obama being a man, which this lady at jury service was also explaining, if that's the right word, to all of her colleagues on the jury. It's not that different from claiming that Barack Obama's passport was faked or his birth certificate was faked, which was essentially how Donald Trump got into politics. So what question do you think we should do now? I mean, where do we go next? This morning, I mean, because goodness knows what will happen in the next 24 hours and determine what it is that we talk about tomorrow. It's Wednesday, so we will be covering PMQs today. Kemi Badenoch, as far as I can tell, flying solo on the question of JD Vance's comments yesterday. She sought essentially to excuse, if not defend them, albeit that this put her at odds with every other member of her party who offered a public opinion, most obviously the former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. James Cleverly, you know, I this curse of O'Brien, I kind of respond. The Tory party's been so hideous in recent years that I overreact to humanity or apparent decency when it's on display. It's led me into some very, very tricky territory. It's led me into just got that little swallow thing in my mouth then, like you get when you're about to be sick. It made me say nice things about Matt Hancock. That's the curse of O'Brien. But James Cleverly stood up in the House of Commons and described Keir Starmer as not having put a foot wrong over the weekend. And that is quite reassuring. That's, that's a little bit like what politics was like before Dominic Cummings got his filthy fingers all over our parliament, all over our democracy. It was nice to hear. I don't think Badenoch's quite capable of going that far. You know, even if she said Keir Starmer hasn't put a foot wrong all weekend, which she didn't, she would then have to add, and I'm delighted that he's done exactly what I said he should do. Do you know what I mean? We've all worked with someone like that. We all know someone like that. But Cleverly was good. Cleverly was nice. Vance, on Vance, he was also unequivocal. I mean, pretty much everybody was. Makes it all the more laughable that Kemi Badenoch has instructed her colleagues to stop tweeting and to stop putting stuff on social media without having thought it through. This from the woman, of course, who never has to apologise or make amends because she never, ever commits any gaffes, which I'm just using to set up PMQs later today. That will be with us at about 12 noon. I'm also going to get someone to talk to you about tariffs, just to find out a kind of idiot's guide. You might not need it, but I do, because I'm an idiot. So we need an idiot's guide to what this tariff scenario is going to mean. It doesn't seem to have landed particularly well with the markets. Some movement on the markets yesterday that was positively Trussian in its apparent negativity. But the question of what we talk about next, I think, is going to be defined slightly by JD Vance. I think that we might move towards the slightly easier phone in. This is Nigel Farage's old mate, okay? Three separate occasions where he has attacked and lied about the UK.
What is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK, since Labour just took over.
But we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British, of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes.
That's not true. None of that was true. You know it's not true. The first bit was perhaps a joke, although Kemi Badenoch came out and I think repeated it. So I think for this hour, why does JD Vance keep attacking the United Kingdom specifically? Why? I don't know why. I'll remind you about what he had to say about our troops, which is why he is in the news today. And I'll tell you what's interesting. What's interesting is all the people who have... You remember what I said yesterday about that old Japanese proverb? That if you get on the wrong train, you must get off at the very, very first station that you can. But we never do. If you got on the wrong train with Donald Trump, you're still on it. But somehow you're allowed to attack JD Vance. I don't know whether you've noticed this. Quite a lot of the Trumpish sycophants have given themselves permission to attack JD Vance. But, I mean, they're two peas in a pod, aren't they? They're two sides of the same coin. They are president and vice president. Anything happens to Trump, Vance becomes president. Who's number 3? I think Rubio's number 4. Is he in the sort of chain of command, in the chain of succession? But it's pathetic because you've got on the wrong train and you can't turn around and say, oh my God, the people I hate the most were completely right about Donald Trump. James bloody O'Brien, James O-Brexit, he's done it again. They can't do that. They can't turn around and say, sorry, I got it all completely wrong again, like I did with Brexit, like I did with Liz Truss, like I did with austerity, like I did with Boris Johnson. They never said sorry or mea culpa for that, so they're not going to do it now for Trump. But they know in their bones that they have behaved abominably, that they have betrayed Britain, that they have, especially if they're journalists, that they have denied the British public the information it needs to make an informed opinion on all of these issues. Only one that we voted on, I suppose. But they can't do that. But they know it, which is why you'll hear quite a lot of vitriol in the way that JD Vance is being discussed or written about. There'll be quite a lot of people giving themselves almost a therapeutic day out at the races, attacking JD Vance, because deep down, they enabled him by being so slavish in their support of Donald Trump. So this is him talking about the military.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country and ensure that America has a long-term interest. You're not going to do that if you come to the Oval Office, insult the president, and refuse to follow his plan for peace.
Ignorant, obnoxious, dishonest. Okay? But also specifically attacking us. This one he didn't get away with. I'll play you the hat-trick again, and then I'll remind you who his best friend in British politics is. So here's that hat-trick of lies and attacks on the UK again.
What is the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon? And we were like, maybe it's Iran, maybe Pakistan already kind of counts. And then we sort of finally decided maybe it's actually the UK, since Labour just took over.
But we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British, of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes.
And here's his best friend in Britain.
I think you've got the photographs of me with JD Vance.
Yeah,
yesterday.
So you also met with Team Random, JD Vance.
I met with JD. Now, I've known JD since 2012. I knew him way before he was getting into politics. He's a friend of mine. I spent quite a lot of time with him. And, I've known him for 14 years. Kemi Badenoch's known him for a fortnight. Nobody in the Labour Party knows him at all.
There's a picture now of JD Vance before meeting you, Nigel Farage.
Slightly different style of photograph, I have to say.
So 14 minutes after 11. Question I wasn't expecting to ask you this morning, but my goodness me, it's popped up pretty powerfully, hasn't it, in the course of our conversations. Why does JD Vance... I say hate Britain. It doesn't quite sound right, does it? I mean, it's a bit like that old joke. Why do you hate me? Why do you hate Britain? Why does JD Vance keep attacking the United Kingdom? 0345 6060 973. Why does the Vice President of the United States of America single out our islands for a particularly pungent brand of obnoxious dishonesty? I mean, they're always obnoxious and they're always dishonest, but you can't argue with the observation that he appears to reserve a particular pungency, a particularly disgusting set of lies and embellishments for the United Kingdom. It's got something to do with Farage. It must do, because he popped up in America claiming that he can't say what he wants in this country without being locked up, to which there's only really one response. Why haven't you been locked up? But Vance buys into it. Vance plays a particularly unpleasant hand when it comes to these islands, when it comes to the United Kingdom. I've got no idea why, which is good news for you, because it means I'm not going to inflict a particularly lengthy monologue on you at this point. That's why I've relied on the clips. This question has not occurred to me before. I just Eleanor reminded me of these previous examples of him singling out the United Kingdom. You go back to the Munich Security Conference, you go beyond that, and then you look at yesterday when he insulted our military, including our fallen, the absolute gold standard of betrayal, to insult our dead military. Why is JD Vance doing this? Because I'm not sure any of this happens by accident. Why is JD Vance doing this? And why on earth is Nigel Farage in bed with him? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 11. Elon Musk does it too. And Elon Musk, maybe they're in lockstep. I keep reading that Musk and Peter Thiel, another chap who spent a lot of time in apartheid-era South Africa and went on to make a ton of money. I keep reading that they persuaded Trump to adopt JD Vance as his running mate, as his vice presidential running mate. I don't know. I mean, it seems feasible. It seems plausible. And Musk keeps attacking the UK. And the reason they seem to be doing it is because they're terrified of regulation. They're terrified of online regulation. Because that would involve them being held responsible for children buying knives on TikTok or Twitter, or children being radicalized online, or people spreading genuine incitement to racial hatred or even acts of terror. And if you were to hold the platforms responsible and to regulate properly, then the business model would be compromised. But I think they're too rich to care about that. It's the propaganda tools would be compromised. If Facebook had been regulated in 2015, it's highly likely there would have been no Brexit, because the publication of blatant, tailored, bespoke lies delivered, gift-wrapped into your Auntie Doris's Facebook feed. Actually, I stopped saying that. Into your Facebook feed, to the degree that you still think the stuff you read then was true. It should have been regulated in the way that I am, or in the way that newspapers are, somewhat less so, but still much, much more than the online space. So I think Musk and Zuckerberg and the rest of them like to portray the United Kingdom as being an enemy of free speech, because it allows them to claim that the regulation that's coming in to keep our children safe, and in some cases alive, is an infringement of that free speech. And you can see it most clearly in the responses to the riots in the summer, the Farage riots, as many people call them, and the way that people still lie about what you could get locked up for. You get locked up for memes, you get locked up for... And Musk buys into this. Musk is at the absolute forefront of this stuff. It's absolute nonsense. Everybody jailed in the first round of jailings pleaded guilty to what they were accused of, and absolutely none of them were accused of posting memes. It is the difference, if you like, between shouting instructions at a mob, a murderous mob, and shouting out of your window when there's nobody there to hear. They're two completely different things, and one has a criminal heft that the other one lacks. This stuff is easy to understand unless you're determined not to understand it. And the Vice President of the United States of America is determined not to understand it, is determined to spread these lies. Why does JD Vance keep maligning the United Kingdom and lying about what happened here. 0345 6060 973. Ash is in High Wycombe. Ash, what is going on here?
So the issue with anything of 1984, trying to control the narrative, trying to control what's said and who people believe, and all they need to do is keep their own power base on board. So in a direct sense, it doesn't matter what's being said in Britain because British people don't vote for them.
Right.
But obviously, there's a lot of British actors. There's a lot of British musicians. If those are voices that Americans in their fan base listen to, they might start to think, well, hang on a minute, if Brian Cox from Succession is calling Donald Trump the C word on British TV programmes, maybe I need to have another look at that because that's Brian Cox.
That's quite a good endorsement of our free speech, though, isn't it, that he can do
absolutely.
that?
I don't know. And the brilliant thing about that is, you can have these little moments of British TV that go viral, and because of the internet, it can reach people.
You've got Robert De Niro doing it at the Oscars. You've got loads of American Taylor Swift coming out and doing it and ending up on the wrong end of public protest, ending up being booed at the Super Bowl. So I don't know if it's that necessarily.
Well, it's you've got to bear in mind that there are no voices from the Ukraine other than Vladimir Zelensky, because there is no Ukrainian TV stars, there is no Ukrainian music stars in America. So what you're looking at that takes you out of America, that gives you a broader worldview, is basically Britain and Canada. Canada also, obviously, Canadian actors and singers. And
I'm going to steer you away from the actors and singers because I just think only because I think you have a point, but I don't think it is just them. I think it's also journalists, commentators, politicians. I think it is people still committed to the truth that are more likely to be. I mean, some of the clips from this program have done extraordinary business in the United States of America, possibly for the reasons that you describe, because we can get to places that some American media can't, because the effort put into cowing them is now so considerable.
Absolutely, and LBC is fantastic, but the way you push back against that, if someone's telling the truth and providing facts, is you say they're biased. You say they're part of the enemy team. And what's interesting at the moment is what's going on with Canada and putting on the tariffs on Canada. Is what's going to happen is that prices of American goods are going to go up. They're saying about Canadian oil and stuff. What they're going to do is turn around and say, look, the Canadians have put up your prices. The Canadians are your enemy. The Canadians are trying to extort money out of you, when obviously it's the tariffs that they put on. They're trying to break that link, and, the Canadians are the enemy. The British are the enemy.
And we're here to protect you. So it's part of the strongman playbook. And also I still get messages. I still see people from, not just from the United States, actually. There's plenty of people in Britain who think that we have no-go areas in this country.
Yeah.
Donald Trump talks about Europe being overrun by various, mythical enemies and problems. And it's a bit like what the Daily Mail used to do with immigration. It's, it persuades people in areas where there isn't any immigration that there will be soon, and it's awful. You speak to people in the areas where there is quite high immigration, and usually they're much, much, much more relaxed about it. So he uses the United Kingdom as there but for the grace of Trump, go we.
I've got a friend in America who spent many years living here. He's a teacher. He's married to a black woman, and he absolutely despairs every time he hears, these portrayals of Britain, because he's lived here. He knows none of it's like that. But obviously they have to portray this as a worse place in America because America has to be the best, and we protect your way of life.
Yeah, and there but for the grace of Trump go we. And we've got a Muslim mayor of London as well. So in Ash's analysis, that's why Trump was obsessed with Sadiq Khan during his first term. And of course, why the radicalised online right are absolutely obsessed with Sadiq Khan, screaming at the top of their voices on the one hand that these people don't integrate, and then screaming at the top of their voices on the other hand when a Muslim Londoner becomes mayor of London 3 times, screaming that he's part of the problem. What is he, to integrate? I don't know. And this is, of course, what Trump has done overnight. All federal funding will stop, capital letters, for any college, school or university that allows illegal protests. And remember, who gets to decide which protests are legal or illegal? Agitators will be imprisoned. This is free speech. Nick had a guest, didn't he, a few weeks ago from The Spectator, who came on the show and said Donald Trump's going to be great for free speech. Anyway, agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No masks in capital letters with an exclamation mark. I don't know why. He's just dropped that into the middle of the post. Thank you for your attention to this matter, he adds, because he likes to sound like a grown-up sometimes. So there it is. That's the latest on free speech. Criticising or criminalising protest is one of the absolutely undisputed hallmarks of authoritarian regimes. So why does JD Vance attack the United Kingdom so much? Is it because we actually show Americans what proper freedom looks like? Phil's in Trowbridge. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
I'm all right. And what's on your mind?
So I think JD is using or trying to attack the UK because I think he wants, he sees the UK as a supporter of Ukraine and Zelensky.
Yes.
So he's using people like Farage, Tice, etc., and the right to help amplify the lie that Ukraine invaded, or Ukraine is sort of responsible for the war.
They brought it on themselves. They poked the bear. The whatever it might be. That's in the same way that Poland was responsible for their own invasion in 1939.
Absolutely, and let's also not forget that he is vice president to a reality TV star, and the interview that he did with Hannity. JD will see that as good TV. It's going to get reposted on Elon Musk's sort of platform, and I think the absolute end game is America wants the lithium, which by coincidence is used in Tesla batteries.
I'm going to have to find a bigger boat because as with an earlier caller, not long ago, I'd have reached for my tinfoil hat button at this point and told you to wind your neck in. But anything is possible in the world of Trump because nothing is guaranteed, nothing is certain. It could be as simple as you describe. It doesn't really explain why they're attacking the United Kingdom specifically. Why does JD Vance keep attacking us specifically?
I think maybe there's a degree to put pressure on Farage, which he's beginning to do. And in fairness to Farage, and forgive me for saying this.
No, of course.
I respect him for saying yesterday at the farmers' protest that JD was wrong. However, there are still elements that...
Respect is a bit strong, isn't it? You can acknowledge, I think, without necessarily respecting. The man's never done anything honest in his life. He's obviously been pushed into a place where he felt he had absolutely no choice but to do that. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to, start waltzing around on Poppy Day if he'd contributed or failed to condemn a really vicious attack upon our military. But I take your point. And Musk
that's a very good point.
Saying you haven't gone far enough or you haven't got what it takes to be leader. They want him to tack ever further to the right. And I guess, as Jamie reminds us, part of the answer to this question might just be that we speak English. So it's a heck of a lot easier to use us as an example of false example of what will happen if you don't put all your trust in an authoritarian. You will end up like London, which is the best place in the world to live. No offence to Trowbridge, Phil.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think that there's also something else that is partially linked, in my opinion, to what you were saying sort of before sort of taking my call.
Yeah.
In the sort of Trump sort of message yesterday about sort of free speech, masks, etc., who determines whether or not it's an illegal protest.
Yes.
I think there's a degree of smoke and mirrors here. So by sort of saying that, Trump is effectively ripping up the First Amendment. He's also trying the Fourth Amendment of I think it's search and seize with the ICE raid. He's looking to rip up the 14th Amendment of birthright, and he's looking to change the 22nd Amendment. So all these things are happening in the background while JD is potentially offering this sort of distraction over here.
Yeah, and distraction coupled with, if you don't let us do whatever we want, you're going to end up like this. And of course, that's why Elon Musk bought Twitter, so that the lies about this country and the claims that we've got, and the most recent one involved footage from a Batman film that he claimed was a hospital in Birmingham being overrun by rampaging immigrants. And just beyond parody, beyond satire, and yet passed off in the sewer that Twitter has become as reportage and news. So if you're an impressionable American sitting in Wyoming watching this on Twitter, you think, well, we don't want to end up like London or Birmingham or Britain or the United Kingdom. It sounds absolutely awful. And of course, the worst people are the ones that join in from this side of the pond, the ones that are actually complicit, like latter-day Lord Haw-Haws, in the denigration of our islands, in the denigration of this country. This is, someone sent this to me. I was thinking about this earlier, and it goes way back. It's Carol Cadwallader, who is owed so many apologies by so many people, pointing out some years ago that Trump and Brexit are not two different things. They are the same things, same companies, same data, same Facebook, same Russians, same Cambridge Analytica, same Robert Mercer, same Steve Bannon, same Breitbart, same Alexander Nix, same Donald Trump, same Nigel Farage. We got a lot of messages yesterday. I didn't read them all out in the end because I thought it was a bit too self-referential, from people getting off the train, people who've fallen for this and are now, as a consequence of what's happened in the United States, in the Oval Office and latterly with JD Vance, now realizing maybe, actually, I mean, if she's right and all those things are linked, maybe I've been backing the wrong horses for years. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I suppose sometimes we should think about it from the other end of the argument, the other end of the question. So if you were, and they tend not to ring me anymore, although I get the occasional one in my inbox, if you were a Faragist, if you were a fully paid up member of the Liz Truss fan club or the Brexit Preservation Society, what answer would you give to the question of why JD Vance keeps attacking your country? I suppose ultimately you'd have to say because our country deserves it, because the United Kingdom depicted on TikTok and in the sort of sewers of TikTok and Twitter, the darker corners of those social media platforms where people spend their entire lives posting footage of crimes being committed by people of colour, claiming that it's somehow representative of the whole of the United Kingdom, where no crime is ever committed by anybody white ever. If you were of that view, either because you've been brainwashed by your feed or because you're a racist who knows that it's lies, but you love the racism so much you end up loving the lies, then you would probably say, because he's right. JD Vance keeps attacking this country because he's right. Because this is all the things that he says it is. It was interesting, wasn't it, in the Oval Office when Zelensky asked him if he'd ever been to Ukraine. And he just stopped himself from saying no, but I've seen it on Twitter. He just stopped himself from saying, I mean, he couldn't claim that he'd ever been there because, of course, he hasn't. But he just stopped himself from saying, no, I get all my information from the radicalised online right on social media. That's how I know exactly what's going on in Ukraine, because Billy Buncher numbers, or whatever the Kremlin equivalent or the United States equivalent of Billy Buncher numbers with a bulldog avatar, told me that he steals all the money, or that he... Anyway, there we are. That he sells it to Hamas. That was one of the lies that went around this week, and Tucker Carlson bought into it. These are not coincidences. These people are all committed to massive lies, not just about Ukraine, but also about us. Why? Why does JD Vance keep lying about the United Kingdom? Why does he keep lying about Britain? Why does he keep attacking us using lies? Anthony's in Chingford. What's going on, Anthony?
Hi, good morning, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
The question is, why is JD Vance attacking UK?
Yes.
I don't think it's straightforward as that. It's not really JD Vance. It's the narrative of Trump that is attacking the UK. And I would ask you that Putin changed the constitution of Russia twice. And how did he do that? He did that because everyone was scared to say anything against it. And he got it through twice. He's now president for life. Is it president for life? And I'm convinced that is the ultimate game, the ultimate aim.
But I mean, you might be right, and I think they've hinted at it. But why would that involve attacks on this country?
He's trying to instill fear, not peace. He's not trying to do.
If you don't let me do this, we will end up like that. Where
No. His ultimate aim is exactly the same. There's no difference between that doing to us and sacking all of the Navy and putting to any of the federal employees. If you say anything against me, you're going to get the sack. He's going to change the Constitution and be in there a lot longer than his term. That is his aim, by fear.
But fear of what?
Fear of saying anything against him, the same as every.
Yeah, but why does that? So why would that involve attacking the United Kingdom?
It's the same as attacking everyone else. Why is it any different from attacking everyone else from his own?
But he's not.
Employees?
I mean, he's very specifically singling out, and Trump isn't doing it, presumably because he still wants the state visit that's been dangled in front of him. But he's not disciplining Vance. He's not telling Vance to wind his neck in. These are specific lies and attacks on the United Kingdom. It's not just part of a broader scattergun approach. This is very specific to the United Kingdom.
Do you think JD Vance would do anything that would upset Trump?
No, of course not. That's what I'm saying. He's obviously doing it with Trump's approval, but Trump won't do it himself because he wants the state visit. So why?
There you go. There you go.
Well, not there you go. I said that 3 times already. You're not answering the question of why he is singling out the United Kingdom. You're claiming he's not, and he just is. I mean, that's not an opinion. That's counting.
Well, he's not attacking just England.
No, of course he's not. But so what other countries is he attacking in the way that he's attacking the United Kingdom, Anthony?
Well, he's been in how many days? 40 odd days.
No, it's not a trick question. What other countries is he specifically attacking in the way that he's attacking the United Kingdom?
I'm not differentiating between.
Oh, right. Well, then we're having 2 completely different conversations. I'm asking why he's singling out the United Kingdom for attack, and you say he isn't. So I say, what other countries is he attacking? And you start wibbling about differentiation. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but my patience is finite. Simon is in Southwell. Simon, what would you like to say?
I'd like to, as a former Reform candidate in the last election in July.
Blimey, that's a first. Welcome, Simon.
Yeah, I know, very brave of me to ring. What I'd like to say is a lot of people have put a lot of effort into working for Reform, and I personally was at the Peterborough by-election as an election observer, and I've sort of supported him all the way through to the election. Now, what I'm very, very worried about now is that Reform's going great guns. It's got fantastic support. And I think if we're not careful, that Nigel Farage's relationship with JD Vance and Trump will put off a lot of grassroots workers who are doing great stuff. I personally, I send so much a month to Reform. It's not a massive amount of money.
Sure.
But
how can you be respectfully?
Yeah.
How can you be surprised by this? He's been shilling for Trump since long before anyone thought Trump would end up in the White House.
Because I think what happened over the weekend, was the big reveal. I mean,
well, listen to this. I don't know if you heard this. This is Farage talking about JD Vance. Okay, the dates are in here.
You know, I think you've got the photographs of me with JD Vance.
Yeah,
yesterday.
So you also met with Team Random JD Vance.
I met with JD. Now I've known JD since 2012. I knew him way before he was getting into politics. He's a friend of mine. I spent quite a lot of time with him, and I've known him for 14 years. Henry Badenoch's known him for a fortnight. Nobody in the Labour Party knows him at all.
There's a picture now of JD Vance before meeting you, Nigel Farage.
Slightly different style of photograph, I have to say.
I mean, literally, like a schoolboy claiming, no, he's my friend, not yours. I knew him before you did. And that goes back to 2012. They're part of the same project, Simon. So why would the events of this weekend suddenly make you worried?
Because it's... Well, on a personal level, it's absolutely categorically bullying, and
of Ukraine, of Zelensky.
No, it's bullying of a human being. It doesn't matter whether it's Zelensky or.
No, I just wanted to know what example of bullying you were referring to.
Oh, the way that the man was treated. He might be the greatest, stealer of money from Ukraine ever, but
that's a lie.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter whether it is or isn't. The point of
course it matters. Of course it has to matter. How can you say the truth? I know you're a reform candidate, but even so, how can you say the truth doesn't matter?
That was very, very funny.
I'll do my best. Answer the question. How have you ended up thinking the truth doesn't matter, mate?
No, what I'm saying is that...
I heard what you said.
The thing that affected me most as an observer and a supporter of Nigel Farage was the cruelty and the inhumane way that man was treated.
It's empathy. Respect. I've got respect for that position. And I mean, I won't hit you over the head with all the reasons why you shouldn't have been surprised by that at all. But your man came out and tried to blame it all on Zelensky.
Well, actually, my man is not my man, because I personally, I'll probably get shot for saying this, I think Richard Tice would make a much better leader of reform than Nigel Farage.
Free speech on this programme, mate. You can say what you want.
I went, I'll go down that route. You know, I'm happy to go down that route. I went to the Boston acceptance sort of rally for Richard Tice, and it was only 2 weeks after I was selected as a potential candidate.
So it was his party that you wanted really to campaign for and represent, and then suddenly the rug got pulled from beneath all of you, and up popped Nigel again.
Do you want the honest truth?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Do you know why I want the honest truth?
Why?
Because the truth matters.
Yeah, it does, but yeah, I'm not saying Nigel is a bad man or a bad leader.
I'm not. I mean,
what I'm saying is, it's like you had Sir Alex Ferguson managing your team, and then you sack Sir Alex Ferguson and you put Sam Allardyce in.
Hey, free speech. You get locked up in this country for saying what you believe, according to your lot, but not on this programme. I don't know that anyone's ever compared Richard Tice to Alex Ferguson before, or indeed Nigel Farage to Sam Allardyce. But Simon, thank you, and thank you for your contribution to the programme. I won't hold your feet to the fire over the question of why you think the truth doesn't matter, because sometimes it's not fair. It's not what you rang in to discuss. But I'm grateful to you for your insights. The question of why JD Vance is attacking the United Kingdom, I don't think you actually got around to answering.
Well, I said to the lady who I was talking to, I think it boils down to something very simple, and that is an insecurity. I think Trump and Vance have got into positions of incredible power, and now they're there. They've got a sort of insecurity towards European education, sophistication, if you want to call it that. And I think they're out of their depth, and it's something very, very simple, and just lashing out.
Whoever's nearest, or whoever is currently most closely associated with Zelensky. Thank you, Simon. It's to my not shame, but to my surprise, I realise I haven't really explored the dichotomy that you described, whatever it was that reform represented before Farage got back on the bandwagon. And I'm really interested to hear that sort of sense of disappointment, or even betrayal. Betrayal's a bit strong. That sense of disillusionment and disappointment in your voice. I hope you'll ring me again, mate. I really do. It's 11:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
51 is the time. PMQs is on the way. I keep getting sent things that have apparently happened in the United States of America, and I have to keep trying to double and triple check whether or not it's true. Is it true that they are now removing from the military website in the United States a sort of little archive, or an archive, sorry, not a little archive, an archive of women's achievements? I think it is. I think there's an op-ed in the New York Times that makes this point. I said that we are living in, I've said it before, I'll say it again, very strange times. But think about this list of names, okay? JD Vance, Elon Musk. That might be the whole list. I should have thought this through before I started speaking. So JD Vance, Elon Musk. Who else is on the list? The people that keep attacking the United Kingdom from the other side of the Atlantic. Doesn't matter, does it? Those are the two most powerful men in America, apart from Donald Trump, who doesn't really attack the United Kingdom. He might single out a politician who has committed the unacceptable offence of being a London-born Muslim. But why did JD Vance and Elon Musk keep attacking this country? I don't know, and I want to. Tom's in Maidstone. Tom, why?
So much of what the US is founded upon is derived from British culture and history.
True. Yes.
So you've got the Bill of Rights, you've got the Constitution, and they all derive themselves from things like Magna Carta and English common law. So in many ways, British culture forms the rock bed which underpins American culture. And if you intend to overthrow that state of affairs, if you intend to diminish the role of the Constitution, if you intend to tear up the Bill of Rights, then what you need to do is also you need to diminish the origin of those documents and those principles.
So you have to make the United Kingdom something contemptible.
Yeah, you make it a pariah.
Regardless of the truth. I mean, I don't want to pick on that last fella with the Reform candidate, but that idea that the truth doesn't matter is it's what is politically advantageous that matters. It does keep coming back. We do keep coming back to that, don't we? All the time.
Yeah.
Steve Bannon would be on the list. Liz Truss would be on the list. Liz Truss keeps attacking this country, doesn't she? But Bannon, Musk, Vance, in order to, and again, I think we've all parked our tinfoil hats for a while, Tom. I don't know when we'll be recognising them again. But if you are truly embarked upon a plan to dismantle American democracy, then why wouldn't you be trying to throw shade at its roots?
Absolutely.
Well played. It is 11:54. Keith's in Coulsdon. Keith, what would you like to say?
Well, to be honest, James, I think it's somewhat more simpler than that.
Good man.
If you think about it, we as a country have moved to the left governmentally.
Yes.
I'm no Labour supporter, but when you look at the actual situation at the moment,
yes,
we've moved to the left.
Yes.
Where is Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance? If they don't, the Americans view our Labour government as being socialist, and the word socialist in America is near enough a swear word.
Mm.
So,
you can only do that if you don't know what the word socialist means, can't you? You can only see Keir Starmer as a socialist, but that's not the point, because the truth doesn't matter. What matters is what works.
And it does work for them by saying, look at the Brits. They're socialist. They get taxed to provide for other people's health care. They get taxed to do this. They get taxed to do this. This is not the American way. I can remember watching an interview on the television of a right-wing American gentleman,
yes,
basically virtually in tears when he screaming that he didn't want his tax dollars used to provide health care for other citizens.
Yeah, I take your point. So we've become a kind of lodestar of everything that they reject, and if they had a population that came to a proper understanding of how good these things are, then their entire project would be doomed.
Yeah, I think it's just that simple. If we had a Conservative government now, I would put money that we wouldn't be getting these digs.
I wonder.
I really do.
Yeah, even if they were bringing in the Online Safety Act.
Yeah,
That's where I depart. That's where I disagree with you. I think in the weeks and months to come, right, the Online Safety Act is going to become more and more and more important to understanding why they keep attacking the United Kingdom. But I could be wrong. I could be right. Isn't that a song by Public Image Limited?
Yeah, but I still say that they brand in their political mind, they've branded us as a socialist country.
Yeah.
Okay, so Keir Starmer, I don't think he's a good prime minister, but he played a blinder when he was
he did in the Oval Office
with Trump.
Yes.
I mean, that I've been a salesman all my life, and I thought, my God, that was one good performance.
Yeah. But doesn't that mean he is a good prime minister? That's arguably one of the single most important things he's done as prime minister, and you've just described it as having played a blinder.
Yeah, but I don't think he.
But that means he's a good prime minister.
He's not of my political persuasion. So
because he thinks that we should all be paying for the NHS and things like that.
No,
I thought that was your political persuasion.
Yeah, look. I am centre right. I'm not a fascist. I'm
very glad to hear it, Keith. To be fair, Keith, that's what all the fascists say.
Brand me with what you like.
I'm not branding you with anything, mate. Yes.
I'm an ex-soldier. I sit to the right, but I'm just saying.
I understand.
My opinion is that it's straight up. Because we've got what they see as a socialist government.
We've become a whipping boy. We've become a very helpful whipping boy. Before you go,
very useful.
As an ex-soldier, what did you make of those comments from Vance yesterday?
Absolutely and utterly disgusting. I mean, okay, it makes it worse. He served with the U.S. Marines, so he should understand what...
Yes, you'd think so. The role that the Allies have played in upholding. I mean, to be fair, I think he was in the press office rather than on sort of on manoeuvres. But still, you're right. If he wore the uniform, you'd think he'd have even if he doesn't have a greater understanding of the facts, he'd have a little bit more respect for the for cooperation and support that we've provided over all the years. Thank you, Keith. I'm not branding you as anything. It's coming up to 11:59. Natasha Clark is here to set the scene for this week's PMQs. And it's hard to call, is it, this week or not?
Yeah, I think so. It's obviously been a week that's completely been dominated by foreign affairs. And it's been one that I think Kemi Badenoch has been quite keen to lean into the unity that exists across the House on it.
Not only with the caveat that, thank goodness, yes, I'd like to thank the Prime Minister. I'd like to congratulate the Prime Minister for doing exactly what I told him to do.
Oh, yes. So I wonder if that might come up again. Yes, that's true. That's true. It's been a while since that. And I wonder if she might do the same on welfare cuts, actually, because we know that Rachel Reeves is going to have a couple of weeks now to try and fill some economic black holes. And if I were her, I'd be saying, well, I've been calling for welfare cuts for ages, and now the government are going to do it.
Does this work, do you think, politically?
I don't think so.
I don't think it does either.
It's not like Keir... on the plane, we asked, over to Washington, we asked Keir Starmer, what you... Yeah, just dropping that in as many times as I possibly can. We asked him, what did you think of Kemi Badenoch saying that, which we talked about last week? What did you think of Kemi Badenoch saying that she'd stolen your ideas? And he said, I haven't had time to look at a single thing that Kemi Badenoch has done, but I spend the time reading her letter with very carefully and in a jovial fashion, and we all laughed. So
that's it. Don't tell her that you all laughed, because people like her hate nothing more than being laughed at. Do you think she believes it? Do you think she sits there thinking this had never occurred to Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves?
It's a really bright idea until I'd put it in front of them.
We've really never thought of that.
We've never thought about welfare cuts before until I suggested it. Perhaps
we shall see. Anything else? What else? I mean,
if I were the Tories this week, I might go on the workers' rights legislation. It came out yesterday. The full details of what we're going to see in that bill. We know that that's something that the Conservatives have been pressing on quite hard. They think that it's going to make businesses and running a business more expensive, more burdensome, more red tape, and that's exactly something the government say that they don't want to introduce. And according to reports that have been out today, ministers have taken more the side of the unions and less the side of businesses who are urging them to water it down slightly. So I wonder if that might be something that Kemi Badenoch can press on.
This isn't correcting you, but I do think that the syntax of political discussion in this country often overlooks the fact that when you say unions, we mean workers.
Sure, yeah.
We mean the workforce.
Yes.
So the legislation takes the side of the workforce as opposed to the owning class, as a good Marxist would
Yes,
say.
but in terms of the people who are fighting this battle, it is between the businesses on one side lobbying and the unions on the other side lobbying on behalf of the workers, and they are the ones involved in this. Farmers as well. We had yet another farmers' protest yesterday. We know that the Conservatives are still banging the drum on this. Potentially that might be something that will come up, but I'm not quite sure that there is any political capital to be gained from that, because it doesn't feel like Rachel Reeves is about to stand up in her spring statement in a couple of weeks' time and introduce much movement on this. There was a consultation that was snuck out a couple of weeks ago, actually, sort of on potential changes to this, but everybody I've been speaking to seems to think that that's not going to happen. So let's wait and see.
Indeedy, and we are at the point in the week where if Kemi Badenoch gets to her feet, then we will cross live to the House of Commons for PMQs. I was watching Parliament yesterday and I saw Stephen Flynn. Isn't it extraordinary how when you cease to be part of the furniture at PMQs. You drop out of the. I mean, not in Scotland, obviously, but in Westminster.
You'd forgotten he existed.
I hadn't forgotten he existed. I'd forgotten how effective he was in Parliament. Actually, is what I was going to say.
Okay.
Because I kind of miss his contributions.
Yeah, he was always really strong, and he was always really good at pressing the Prime Minister on something that the Liberal Democrats didn't do. And we are seeing that dynamic really switch on Prime Minister's questions at the moment, I think.
Do you know what else we should start doing? We should start wondering what Ed Davey might do.
That's a good shout, yeah. Okay, so you're going to double my workload by asking me to do two sets of predictions.
I think you should start now. Okay. Where do you think Ed Davey might go this morning? He might call upon Starmer to go in much harder.
Aid on Ukraine and Gaza. I think Keir Starmer was asked about this in the Commons statement and about Gaza aid being blocked on Monday. And I wonder if Ed Davey might press him on that. So that could be two potentials. The Liberal Democrats did send over something in the last couple of minutes, actually, so that might be something that they will break up. John Healey must urge the US to drop the Ukraine intelligence ban.
Yes, we forgot to mention this story. Again, one for the Patriots in the pro-Trump camp in Britain to explain to us. Washington stops the UK from sharing US military intelligence with Ukraine.
Bonkers, isn't it? Crazy.
That's extraordinary.
So if that's the case, it pulls the whole Five Eyes into
Let's
question,
find out.
doesn't it?
Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Divisions between Ukraine and the US only serve Vladimir Putin. President Zelensky is right to try and rebuild his relationship with President Trump. He is keeping a cool head under very difficult circumstances. And I was glad to see President Trump receive his letter positively. What is the Prime Minister doing to help rebuild their relationship after a challenging week?
Minister. Well, she's absolutely right that we need to do everything we can to ensure that the US, Europe and Ukraine are working together on lasting peace. And I'm doing everything I can to play my part in that, in regular contact with all of the key players at the moment, including talking to President Zelensky yesterday afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer. All of us in this House know that the British Armed Forces are a huge source of pride to our country. They put themselves in harm's way to defend our values. As the opposition, we support efforts to resolve this conflict, but we cannot write a blank cheque. If British peacekeeping troops in Ukraine were attacked, whether directly or via proxies, we could be drawn into conflict with Russia. Can the Prime Minister reassure all those who are concerned about the UK being drawn into war?
Minister. Yes, that's the last thing anybody wants to see. And the whole point of ensuring that there's a lasting peace and that any deal, if there's a deal, is defended, is to avoid conflict, to ensure that we do have peace. The way to ensure we have peace is to ensure there are guarantees for any deal that is in place, because the surest risk that there will be conflict is if Putin thinks that he can breach any deal that may be arrived at.
The Prime Minister is quite right, and we on this side of the House agree with him. The objective for his visit to Washington was to get that US security guarantee for Ukraine, and I commend his efforts in this very difficult task. But nonetheless, on Monday, the United States withdrew military aid for Ukraine. Can he update the House on the steps he is taking to persuade America that it is also in their national interest to provide a security guarantee?
Prime Minister. I'm pleased to inform the House that on Thursday of last week we did discuss security guarantees. The President made absolutely clear his commitment to Article 5 of NATO, absolutely clear that he would have our backs because of the relationship between our parties, and agreed that our teams would sit down together to talk through security guarantees. I've spoken to him, I think, 3 times since then on the telephone, because it is vitally important that we work with the US, with Europe and Ukraine and make sure that if there is a deal, it has proper security guarantees in place.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister is not able to comment on specific intelligence matters, and I'm certainly not asking him to do that. However, there are concerning reports that the United States has instructed Britain to suspend intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and other reports that Five Eyes itself may be at risk. We need to make sure America does not disengage. There are some in this House who argue Europe should go it alone. But does he agree with me that without this country's greatest ally, any peace agreement would place a terrible burden on Britain and our taxpayers?
Prime Minister.
Well, I do agree with her wholeheartedly, and that's why in the debate we had just 2 days ago, I've always been clear that we need to ensure that the US, the UK, Europe and Ukraine are working together, but we must not choose between the US and Europe. We never have historically, and we're not going to do so now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his comments on that. He will know that it is not just the security situation that worries people. They are also concerned about trade wars and the economic impact of tariffs, like those levelled on Canada and Mexico yesterday. The best way to avoid America putting tariffs on Britain is to reach agreement on a US trade deal. Following the Prime Minister's trip to Washington, have talks on a UK-US trade deal begun?
Prime Minister.
Well, I was pleased in the meeting I had last week that we did discuss an economic deal and agreed that our teams would indeed sit down rapidly to talk through an economic deal, and that is what they're doing, because as she rightly says, that is far better than getting drawn into conflict in relation to tariffs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the Prime Minister has confirmed that those talks have started. People across our country are worried. They're worried about national security. They're worried about whether we can equip our military fast enough. They are worried about whether we will deploy troops in Ukraine and whether we will be able to keep the peace. They are also worried about our economic security. Can we afford all this? The world is changing fast, and we need an entirely new approach to our economy and our energy security. The budget last year halted growth with higher taxes and higher borrowing. Yesterday, farmers were protesting in Whitehall again. People are hurting. Will he now change course so we can have the economic security we know we need for our national security?
Prime Minister.
We were doing so well. What we inherited was insecurity in our economy. We inherited a 22 billion black hole, and we have now turned that around. We've got the highest investment coming into our economy. We've got wages higher than prices. We've got 3 times interest rates have been cut. That's the difference between stability with Labour and instability with the party opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Prime Minister for his decisive leadership that he has shown in Europe and at home to bolster our collective security. The £13.4 billion increase in defence spending has been very much welcomed in my constituency of Stevenage. Can the Prime Minister outline how that increase in defence spending will boost jobs and growth in places like Stevenage, and would he like to join me in visiting some of those businesses?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question. Our plan for change is built on national security, and that has to go hand in hand with economic security. And as we're returning to 2.5% for the first time since a Labour government, that investment must mean UK skills, UK jobs and UK apprenticeships. And I was very pleased that on Monday we were able to announce a new hub and new spending targets to help 12,000 SMEs access the supply chain, which will boost economic growth, and that'll be really important in so many constituencies. And of course I'll consider his invitation.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I visited Kingston's Army Reserve Centre, met members of the Royal Army Medical Service who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan very bravely. So can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's initial remarks? On Monday, the Prime Minister rightly said a minerals deal only was not a sufficient security guarantee for Ukraine. But since then, the Trump administration has said that a minerals deal is the only guarantee on the table, and President Trump has removed military aid from Ukraine and said that the British cannot share American intelligence with Kyiv. Both those decisions mean more brave Ukrainians will die and further embolden Vladimir Putin. So can the Prime Minister tell the House, does he still believe that President Trump is a reliable ally? And if Ukraine does not get a sufficient security guarantee from this White House, what is the Prime Minister's plan B?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, look, we work very closely with the United States on defence, on security and on intelligence. We have done for many, many years. We're intertwined, and of course they're a reliable ally. We are operating on that basis day in, day out across the world, as he knows. In relation to the situation as it develops, obviously our main focus, our only focus, is on a lasting peace in Ukraine. There are many moving parts, there are many discussions to be had, but what I'm doing is staying focused on what I think is the single most important outcome, which is a lasting peace in Ukraine, which is good for Ukraine, for Europe, and of course essential for the United Kingdom.
So Ed David.
The Prime Minister knows we all support him in that effort. But can I take him back to President Trump's reliability? 4 British women have accused Andrew Tate of rape and human trafficking, and British police have issued arrest warrants. The Tates have tried to escape justice, first to Romania, now to the United States, but I'm delighted that Florida has thankfully opened a criminal investigation. But does the Prime Minister agree that people who are wanted by British police of such appalling crimes should stand trial in our country? And given his assessment that President Trump really is a reliable ally, will his government request an urgent extradition of the Tate brothers?
Prime Minister.
This is a live issue, as he'll appreciate, and therefore I'll tread carefully. But the principle is absolutely clear. Justice must be done in all cases, including in this case. But I won't go into the details because this is a live case, as he knows.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm supporting many parents and
brought it in a little early, partly because it was a curiously well-mannered exchange until towards the end, where, as one texter puts it, she scored a bit of an own goal by bringing the economy back into the conversation. It rather makes your job a bit harder, Natasha Clark, doesn't it?
I don't think it was an own goal on the economy. Just think Keir Starmer...
Giving him an opportunity to pull out all of his lines about what they inherited,
sure,
and
but
then list
also,
all the things that they've achieved.
It's also the job of the opposition at some point to oppose in Prime Minister's questions. I don't quite think there could have been 6 questions without her actually putting the boot in a little bit.
Five examples of harmony.
Yeah, 5 examples of, as Keir Starmer said, we were doing so well.
We were doing so well. As I said, it makes your job much harder.
We can get into the nitty gritty of why it's a good thing for politicians.
How much that going to take us
we've
up
got
to
15
about
minutes,
12, 17, I think.
We can do that.
Well, let's find out after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12 is the time. We missed a little bit at the beginning, which, I mean, it marks an anniversary, a poignant anniversary, but there will be many poignant anniversaries involving the loss of British service personnel on active duty. So I suspect that this was designed very much to address some comments made by the Vice President of the United States of America yesterday.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow marks 13 years since 6 young British soldiers were on patrol in Afghanistan when their vehicle was struck by an explosive, tragically killing them all. Sergeant Nigel Coop was 33. Corporal Jake Hartley was 20. Private Anthony Frampton was 20. Private Daniel Wade was 20. Private Daniel Wilford was 21. And Private Christopher Kershaw was just 19, a teenager. Tomorrow also marks the 18th anniversary of the death of Benjamin Reddy, a 22-year-old serving with 42 Commando Royal Marines, killed in Helmand Provost in 2007. These men fought and died for their country, our country. And across the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, 642 individuals died fighting for Britain alongside our allies. Yeah. Many more were wounded. We will never forget their bravery and their sacrifice. And I know the whole House will join in me in remembering them and all those who serve our country. Yeah.
19 after 12. I think it's pretty clear that element of his statement was made with the words of JD Vance very much in mind. The claim that Britain is a, quote, random country that hasn't fought a war for 30 or 40 years. Kemi Badenoch was invited yesterday to respond to that hideous suggestion.
Well, I know JD Vance quite well. I've looked at the comments. I don't think he actually said that. I think a lot of people are getting carried away. They're saying loads of things and getting quite animated. Let's keep cool heads. America is our closest ally, and I believe that President Trump and JD Vance want peace. They're looking after their national interest. We need to do so as well.
So do you think he was talking about France, not Britain?
I'm not getting into that speculation.
It's a good job she never does gaffes, isn't it? Because then she'd have to backtrack and apologise for them.
I don't have very cool heads about this one, James. It's just...
Well...
It's ridiculous to insinuate that she wasn't speaking about... Who else was he speaking about?
Only 2 countries have pledged to put boots on the ground.
It honestly made me so angry.
Did it?
Yeah, genuinely.
Me too.
Yeah,
I can't remember the last time we've been united in... not just you and me, but absolutely everybody, except it would appear Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, and I was listening to you yesterday, and I sort of saw the reaction start to come through from British politicians, and could not agree more that this guy, and I think Nick said it, dumb as he is aggressive, totally, And this is, I've just come back from Washington. I don't know if I've mentioned this. And I've, spent a long time, seeing Keir Starmer try to repair this special relationship and try and keep it on track. And then JD Vance goes and says something stupid like that. And it makes my blood boil. And
I think, and you may disagree, but I think Starmer... this is what makes him very interesting as a politician, is that his patriotism is real. It's quite an unfashionable patriotism. It's not a performative patriotism, but the way you just articulated your affront at what he said, I feel Starmer feels that very keenly as well. That was that was a very, very authentic moment in the Commons. Yeah, there was absolutely no way that he would have said that and marked those occasions, without the comments that we'd had from JD Vance yesterday. And that was his way of saying, I'm behind my troops, I'm behind my country. We'll never forget their bravery and their sacrifice. A subtle nods to the fact that he thinks that JD Vance couldn't be more wrong on that. And look, he had to row back on those comments yesterday, didn't he? JD Vance said, I wasn't referring to Britain, I wasn't referring to France. Well, come on, mate, we're not silly. You've clearly, it doesn't clearly mean a lot to them, like it means a lot to British troops serving in this country, that we stand side by side and with Afghanistan and Iraq. And actually, really interesting language that Keir Starmer used over the weekend. I don't know if you noticed this, James. Coalition of the willing. Do you remember when that was used? That George W. Bush used the phrase coalition of the willing when he was trying to get us to come and stand up beside them in Iraq, and we did. And America, under previous administrations, have been incredibly thankful for that sacrifice that we made. And it's no coincidence that Keir Starmer is using that same phrase, trying to get the US to give that security guarantee. Good spot. And yet, as we have been discussing all morning, the world in which assurances from Donald Trump on a Thursday would still be relevant the following Wednesday is not the world we live in. I don't know that he's ever made a deal or a promise that he hasn't broken. So I don't know what Starmer is supposed to do differently. I don't think he can do anything differently, but... I think he's doing all he can to do what he can, and I think he wants to take Donald Trump at face value, but we know that it's really difficult to do when he's going to stand up in the Oval Office and say, oh, did I say that last week? I don't remember that, or, and row back from his words. And, officials that I talk to... Vance has done it in the context of what you've just been discussing, pretending that he wasn't referring to Britain and France. It's the most obvious and egregious lie. It's crazy. Like, the officials I've been talking to this week, on Monday, they were terrified about what Donald Trump was going to say about the State of the Union, non-State of the Union address that we saw last night. Because of the comments that you'd seen him come out with on Truth Social about Zelensky on Monday. And actually then this morning someone said, actually, that went a lot better than we thought. Clearly he's cooled down a bit. We have such an emotional president, and the fact that our officials are trying to decide foreign policy on the behaviour of the US president and how he might feel when he wakes up in the morning. How crazy is that? Yeah, and that is, day 45. Exactly. We've, as he said, what did he say earlier? We're only just getting started. Day 45 in the house, in the White House. No one's going to get this. None of your listeners are going to get that reference, are they? Of course they are. It's far too young. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know what people are telling you. Is it a sort of... damage limitation exercise? He is very, very emotional. The one big mystery about Donald Trump is whether or not there is a sort of master plan. The Project 2025 stuff clearly carried a little bit more weight than some of its early critics, early poo-pooers allowed. but he also is a petulant man-child who responds to sort of caressing and cajoling. So is that what Starmer's going to try to do, do you think? And just sort of be the person that he talks to first, even if you can't trust a word that he says?
Yeah, I think he wants to keep him as close as he can do. And we've seen that because Starmer has been talking to him day in, day out throughout this entire peace summit that he had on the weekend with European leaders. A minister told us earlier this morning that he wants to be seen as an honest power broker between all of them, and doing what he can to bring all sides together is clearly the only thing really that he can do, right? And keep those open channels of communication open between Europe, between Zelensky, and try and negotiate something. And John Healey's flying to the US today. He's going to be speaking to his counterparts, put the back channels for this peace deal and what it could look like. And so far, since Keir Starmer returned from Washington, he hasn't got a public rebuke from the president in any way of anything he's saying, apart from, I think there was a comment about the peacekeeping operation and him saying, what the hell were they thinking, or something similar. But it wasn't quite an attack on Keir Starmer. So far, I think he thinks, I can bring everybody together and give it that my best shot. It might not work, and I think there are people in government that realise quite how volatile a Donald Trump administration is going to be. And Keir Starmer clearly spending a lot of time on this, isn't it? He's got a big in tray as it is, and he is now spending a good significant chunk of his time on this. Is Donald Trump serious about a peace deal? Yes, I think he is, but he wants a quick peace. He might want a peace deal that might not be a lasting one, and that's what Keir Starmer's worried about. But yeah, so I think Keir Starmer is doing all he can right now.
He's comfortable in this space.
He's more comfortable than I thought he was going to be. And I think he's done the legwork on this, right? Spending the last 8-9 months speaking to European leaders. We were calling him Air Miles Keir and all that jazz,
well, you say we.
Sorry, we. The media yes. were calling him Air Miles Keir and all that stuff. And he was getting a lot of criticism and a lot of heat for that.
Whereas in fact he was building a coalition of the willing.
Exactly. And now it's come home to roost. And well, hopefully.
That's another really good spot. It sort of puts him in pole position because he's the one that's put in the legwork on holding together this coalition.
I mean, so far we've not had a lot of people willing to get in the coalition of the willing.
Sure.
But hopefully those relationships will pay off. And they're equally, he's getting a lot of slack from his backbenchers for going so close to Trump, and that's going to be the heat is only going to get turned up more on that, I think.
And politically, whatever transpires, he will still, he hopes, be seen as having played a good game. Even if it comes to naught. My feeling is, I have some basis for this with sources, that Trump has decided to pull the plug on Ukraine full stop, and that there is no European seduction process that could lure him back into that place. I don't know whether that's true or not.
He did say sort of last week he believes that going forward it's Europe's responsibility.
Yeah, well, exactly. And usually when he says it, sometimes he does actually mean what he says.
I think there might be an off-ramp. Can British officials persuade them to slowly withdraw that aid to Ukraine and slowly pull out to lessen the impact and get other countries to step up at the same time? Maybe that's something that the British government should pursue.
Do you want a line?
Do I want a line?
This is from Simon.
Go on.
The only peace Trump wants is a piece of Ukraine.
Hey,
Am I right? I'm here all week. Try the veal. That's good, Simon. I'll be nicking that and passing it off at my own, as my own at some point.
Well, look, Donald Trump does want peace. He just wants it for different reasons.
He just wants a piece of Ukraine.
He wants a Nobel Peace Prize, and he wants to be known as the guy that's done something that's impossible. Remember when Starmer gave him the letter from the King, that language. Oh my God, this has never been done before. That's what he wants. He wants to be known as the president.
And we should not conclude this conversation without reference to that letter from the King, because that is, I don't know how much of this show you heard today, but we concluded we've got no stick, but we do still have a little bit of carrot. And by far the biggest bit of the little bit of carrot is the state visit, which he really, really wants. Not as much as he wants a Nobel Peace Prize, probably.
It's up there, though, an unprecedented
I bet it is in his sort of atavistic worldview. I bet that is up there and it is still there. Although I don't know that King Charles is going to be particularly delighted about this.
Well, the King and previously the Queen always have to suck these things up, whether they like them or not, and whether they like the people that they're meeting or not. So, but yes, I think there's no coincidence that Keir Starmer started off that meeting in the Oval Office by pulling that out pretty much immediately as soon as he got there. That put Trump in a good mood, I think, and started off those conversations from a position of, right, okay, here's what we've got for you. What have you got for us? And it worked. It worked really well.
And speaking of good moods, Michael writes, how lovely to hear Natasha Clark's audible spring in her step since her Trump triumph.
Oh, thanks.
That's nice.
Very kind.
Isn't it? I agree.
Spring is in the air, and I'm feeling positive about
As
it.
I mentioned yesterday, my friend Enzo's got his ice cream van back out, so we know
Brilliant.
that spring is going to be...
Where can we find that?
It's in the car park at the Hillier Garden Centre outside Sion House, actually. And if you mention my name, I'm sure he'll give you a
little discount?
give you a free flake.
I was going to say. Or some sprinkles, maybe.
It's 12:30. Very nearly. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Coming up before the end of the programme, I don't know if you remember Victoria Rose, the surgeon who had been doing her damnedest to help some of the most hideously injured children in Gaza. Slightly troubling updates on her attempts to continue that incredibly important work. I want to try and get a better grasp of what this tariff war means, what Trump's tariffs might actually signify, not just, of course, for the United States, but also for us. And Natasha mentioned Rachel Reeves and welfare cuts. Dale Vince, of course, a major contributor to the Labour Party, has something to say on that subject, which he would like to say here. So we'll probably make that happen as well after the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:33. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where, as Natasha Clark reminded us, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is faced with some rather tricky decisions. Under her reading, the world has changed since her budget last October, when it looked as though £9.9 billion was available, according to the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, and that would be a guard against her self-imposed borrowing rules. The latest forecast finds that is likely to disappear because of global factors such as trade tariffs, which we'll talk about later in this segment of the programme, as well as higher inflation and borrowing costs in the UK. Again, reflection of international trends. Dale Vince, as you know, is an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur, also a Labour supporter and a Labour donor. And as a wealthy man, Dale, perhaps an unlikely exponent of a wealth tax.
Yeah, that's true. I'm an unlikely campaigner for a number of things. Like I'm a donor that thinks we should end donations to our political system. But you're absolutely right. I think that our tax system is currently unjust. We tax people with jobs, people that earn their money with a pair of hands at a much higher rate than we tax people that earn money with money. And I think we could change that and raise incredible sums of money and have more fairness in our tax system.
And this as an alternative to the welfare cuts that we are expecting Rachel Reeves, or certainly to the spending cuts that we are expecting Rachel Reeves to announce shortly.
Yeah, and they may include welfare cuts, and these kinds of cuts generally anyway always fall on the people that have the least. And so that's where great harm is done. And what I'm arguing for today is for Rachel to have another look at the idea of a wealth tax. Just 2% on wealth over £10 million will only affect 20,000 people in our country, but raise £24 billion a year, which is an incredible sum of money. We can pay for so many more things other than this 9.9 billion gap. We can fund, so many of the things we need in our country this way, and it would just add a little bit of fairness to our tax system.
You don't need me to run you through some of the traditional objections to this. Everyone will leave. All of the rich. I mean, you might be happy to have some of your wealth taxed in this way, but everyone else will be on the first plane to Dubai.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, is it? Britain is a great place to live. People live here for a reason, and it's not just for low taxes. We're talking 2% on wealth over 10 million. We're talking about 200 grand for somebody that's holding 10 million quid. I mean, it's not the end of the world. And honestly, I think there's a moral issue here as well. If we say we're only prepared to tax people that can't leave, there's something wrong.
When you raise these points with Labour politicians, what objections do they have? What reasons do they give for this being unworkable or unlikely?
I haven't actually had a direct conversation about that. It's just something that I campaign for. But I think it's the stuff that you mentioned, James, the usual things, basically, that people will leave. And I think off the back of Rachel's budget last autumn, we saw reports of people leaving. And in the end, it was a tiny percentage, something like 0.3 or 0.03% of millionaires in our country left the country. Too tiny to worry about, and I think that the kind of people that don't want to pay tax here, I say we won't miss them if they do leave.
And yet how this will be typified in most of the UK media. In fact, how anybody who challenges the status quo generally gets treated in most of the right-leaning UK media. And I wonder if you could update us. I know that you had successfully taken action against the Daily Mail, against Associated Newspapers Limited. You settled a libel claim with them over erroneous allegations that you had supported Hamas. And I know you were taking action against the Guido Fawkes website as well. How's that getting on?
Well, last week, I think it was on the Monday, we settled for the second time with the Daily Mail because they only went out and repeated the libel, having promised not to. That should have been an easy thing, but we had to take them to court to get that far. And then I think it was the Wednesday when the judge read the decision on Guido Fawkes, which took away, this was a preliminary hearing, it took away his chance of defending at a full hearing, and he pulled out, he settled. And the current score in what I, for fun, call Hamasgate, the current score is 7-0, right? Daily Mail twice, 3 Tory MPs, 1 peer, GB News, and Guido Fawkes. And left standing, we've got Richard Tice, and we'll see where that goes now.
And on the Guido Fawkes one, of course, that's not the real name of the man that set it up. Paul Staines, the founding editor, estimated to be paying your legal costs as well. One newspaper suggests might be as much as £100,000. Damages just shy of £10,000. I was advised that you couldn't sue him for libel because of the way that his own assets were arranged.
Yeah, and that was his belief as well. He'd boasted about being basically immune from British law, able to say and do what he liked. And he has, I think, abused a lot of people in public life and has ignored court orders in the past. What we did was to use a piece of media law that the Premier League uses to shut down illegal streaming of Premier League games in order to make sure that when we won the argument in court, we wouldn't be relying on him to take down the content. We're to get a court order against his internet service provider. And that provoked him to actually defend the claim, which I think might have been the first time he's ever done it in British courts, and now to have lost. So it's a fundamental blow, I think, for freedom, actually, freedom of people from abuse by the media, which is what was happening in this case.
Albeit it's a bit of a tin pot media organisation, as you remind us. You've also gone after much bigger beasts like the Mail. But this would be as nothing. I mean, if your wealth tax campaign were to gather momentum, then this would be peanuts compared to what they'd come after you with in the event of the owners of the Daily Mail, for example, thinking that they were going to be required to hand over a percentage, albeit a tiny percentage, of their wealth. You're not cowed by these sort of fights, are you?
No, I'm not. And as long as they keep it honest, then I don't mind. They can have their opinions. I'm not sure if the owners of the Daily Mail are actually tax resident in our country anyway.
That's something else Rachel Reeves was supposed to be looking at. Dale, what's the next stage of this campaign then? Now that you've shared it with us, you've explained it to us, what do you do next?
Well, we're about to appeal part of the ruling from last week in the Richard Tice case, and we've got that outstanding.
No, I'm thinking more of the wealth tax campaign. What would be the next phase of that? Sorry.
That's okay. I'm part of a group called Patriotic Millionaires UK as well, and this is a group of wealthy people that are arguing for the same thing. And I think all we can do really is just to continue to campaign. It makes great sense. It would raise vast sums of money and affect just 20,000 people out of 60 million. It's almost illogical to refuse to do this, in my view.
As opposed to taking something from people who have the least. Dale Vance, thank you. Founder of Ecotricity, of course, Labour Party donor, and member of Patriotic Millionaires. That's an interesting title, isn't it? Always a pleasure. And congratulations on your latest legal victories. I look forward to the next ones. He mentioned tariffs, of course. Dmitryt Grozoubinski is the man to whom we often turn when the befuddlement and bafflement reaches fever pitch on matters international trade. He is the founder of Explain Trade and the author of Why Politicians Lie About Trade, and a trade and negotiations consultant. So he knows about trade, I think we can say. Can you give me an idiot's guide to what these tariffs are, what they do, and what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, James. It's good to be with you. Though
always.
Normally, if I'm with you, that means something's gone horribly wrong somewhere. So that trend is well and truly continuing. So tariffs are a tax. They are a tax on bringing goods that are made somewhere else into the country. So in practice, the way that they work is when a business is bringing stuff across the border, they submit something called an import declaration where they say, hey, here's what we're bringing into the country, and here's how much it's worth at the time it crosses the border before we add things like supermarket markups. And the government has a big list of all the product types in the world and charges a percentage on some products. So it says, okay, you bring in Apple, the tariffs on apples are 10%. You're going to pay a tax to us for doing that of 10% of what this apple's worth.
And I then pass that on to my Apple purchaser, probably.
In most cases, yes. There are like very limited exceptions where like if your margin of profit is so high that you could absorb a 10% tariff, you might not do that just because you want to keep your market share, but that's an exception.
We have I mean, it's almost a cottage industry on the programme at the moment, Dmitry, pointing out the futility of trying to work out what is going on in Donald Trump's mind. But what do you think is going on in Donald Trump's mind regarding the introduction of these tariffs?
I mean, it is somewhat futile. The image that pops into my mind is a grenade inside a fireworks factory. But in practice, I think there are a couple of things that are going on. So first of all, he simply likes tariffs as a concept. He likes the idea of them because in his mind and the way that he describes them, he describes them as a tax on foreigners. He believes this is a tax he can introduce that really hurts other people and not Americans. And we can talk about why that's not accurate at all.
I think most people can work it out for themselves.
Yeah, I would hope so. Maybe not people in the White House, but your listeners certainly. Secondly, because he can introduce them without Congress. There are legal quirks in the US system where, unlike almost anything else, he can just do this at the stroke of a pen.
Okay.
Whereas for anything else, you'd have to go through the messy US legislative system with its filibusters and its checks and balances and whatnot. He can just do this stuff. And thirdly, he legitimately believes that countries that sell the US more than the US buys from them are ripping it off in some way.
Is that? I mean, you say he legitimately believes it, but is it a legitimate belief?
No, it's very hard to describe any situation in which American buyers are looking at what's on the market, finding a product in another country that is the best value in their minds, and paying for it as some sort of great scam perpetrated on the world's richest country.
But this could prompt some importers to start manufacturing in the United States of America to avoid the tariff.
So that's certainly his argument. He's basically saying, listen, it's like any other tax. If you disincentivize a behavior, if you make it more expensive to bring stuff in from abroad, more businesses will start up in the US, start making stuff. Businesses from abroad will move some of their manufacturing into the US. That is his argument.
What impact have these tariffs had so far, and it's early days, therefore also what impact do you expect them to have if they stay in place moving forward?
So again, it's this day 2 of the world's stupidest tariff war. So, but we've already seen a couple of things. First, businesses and investors are like deer in the headlights right now. They are completely paralyzed because, and we saw this a lot during Brexit, even worse than individual tariffs is the uncertainty and the unpredictability. It is very hard to know where to build a factory right now because you don't know how borders are going to work next month, next year, next decade. And so a lot of advisors and a lot of people who are in this space or advising big companies are telling them, listen, just hunker in place and wait until all of the chaos starts to normalize a bit. Don't make any big long-term decisions. So we're seeing that. The stock market, which for a long time simply did not believe that he would lick the hot stove, is now taking that very seriously, and we're seeing huge plunges across US indices. And we are also seeing a plunge in consumer confidence and business confidence and projections of US growth for Q1. So there are already impacts. A lot of those impacts are about the uncertainty and about what these tariffs might do, but it's the tariffs themselves as well.
Crikey. Do you think he fully understands tariffs?
I try really hard not to speculate
Sure.
what's in a man's head or what's in a man's heart. I think Donald Trump generally operates in this space, and he always has, where there is reality and there is what he believes he can sell. And I believe he believes he can sell tariffs as working the way he's describing. Whether he sort of understands on some primal level where someone's explained to him that it probably won't work, I don't know. But he certainly, at least at the moment, believes that this is an argument he can win and a grievance he can address.
And finally, Dmitry, retaliation is inevitable. Retaliatory tariffs.
Absolutely. For a couple of reasons. The biggest one of which is just domestic political. If you punch Mexico in the face, if you punch Canada in the face, the Mexican and Canadian people expect their government to punch back. And you also want to send a message to the US that this stuff has consequences. And I would just say one thing on that, James, if you'll permit me.
Of course.
A lot of the time we talk about this stuff, we often say, well, listen, the US is the bigger economic player here. It can cause more damage to Canada than Canada can cause to the US. And that is absolutely true. But the thing I would always ask people to remember is that pain is not zero-sum and it is not asymmetrical. So, for example, US soybean farmers who are about to face tariffs into China, by far the world's biggest import market for their soybeans, are not helped by the fact that Chinese steel exporters are now going to be more locked out of the US market, and in some aggregate economic way, like steel producing in China is more lucrative than soybeans in America, whatever. So you can cause the US pain if you are smart and tactical. You can cause the Republican Party and the Trump administration acute pain if you are targeted. And the fact that they can cause you more pain does not make the people hurting feel any better.
Beautifully put. In fact, Marion writes, this guy is both brilliantly informed and very funny.
Also incredibly handsome.
Well, I don't know if she can hear that on her radio, but she can certainly check that on Catch Up. Dmitryt Grozoubinski, founder of Explain Trade, a trade and negotiations consultancy, and author of Why Politicians Lie About Trade, providing an idiot's guide to the latest tariff-related news, in which, if you hadn't noticed, I was playing the role of the idiot. It's 12:49. Up next, we'll catch up with Victoria Rose, who you may remember is a consultant plastic surgeon who works for Guy's and St Thomas's and at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, but also, when she can, visits Gaza to minister to some of the most horribly injured children there. Or at least that's what she tries to do. For reasons that will become clear shortly, it is proving rather even more difficult than it usually is.
James O'Brien on LBC.
53 is the time. Everyone's a comedian. Rob's been in touch to say, James, are you going to get a bike with stabilisers for your journey home? No, I'm going to catch a bus, Rob. And I'll tell you, I'm never getting on a bicycle again without a helmet, which if you're not au fait with the reasons why I'm looking rather battered and bruised today, that is why I came off my bike this morning and landed on my head. Happily, I think the show would stand testament to the fact that I don't have a concussion. So it's gone all right, wouldn't you say, Keith? We seem to be okay. But please take my advice and never, ever, ever, ever ride a bicycle without a helmet. Stabilisers remain optional. You will remember Victoria Rose, the consultant plastic surgeon who works for two London hospitals, Guy's and St Thomas's, and Chelsea and Westminster, but also finds the time to travel relatively regularly to Gaza, where the skills of surgeons, plastic, orthopaedic, most obviously are, for reasons you don't need me to explain, in absolutely urgent need. And Victoria tried to get back there in February. And she joins me now to tell us what happened. What happened?
Hi. So, well, we left the UK on the 11th of February, and just to put you in the picture, we normally make our applications to the United Nations and the WHO about a month in advance of any mission that we're going on. And the UN will come back to us 2 weeks before we're about to leave, and they will approve us seats on the convoy into Gaza. So we left on the 11th, 4 of us, all surgeons, knowing that we had approval from the United Nations and the WHO to enter Gaza on the 12th of February. On the 13th of February. On the 12th, we did all our briefings as normal. And at 9:30 in the evening on the 12th of February, we were told that all 4 of us had been denied entry into Gaza by COGAT, who are the coordination of government activities in the occupied territories. They're basically part of the IDF. They don't have to give you any reason why they deny you entry. They are allowed to just deny you entry. Following that denial on the 13th, we were advised by the WHO and the United Nations and the FCDO to reapply for the next convoy, which was due to leave on the 18th. So we put all our forms in again for that one. And again, the evening before, at about 7:30, we were denied entry on the 18th. We then reapplied for the next convoy, which was the 19th. It was supposed to be the 20th, but it had been brought forward because some of the bodies had to be removed from Gaza to be given back to the Israelis on the 20th. So they'd brought the humanitarian convoy a day early. And we found out at about 9:00 at night, again on the 18th, that we'd been denied entry on the 19th. And again, no reason was given.
And I think on the 13th, of the 44 people who had applied, only 22 got in, and only 2 of them were surgeons.
Yes, so what used to happen was that the 2 convoys would go on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and there would be 24 seats. And normally the emergency medical teams would be given around 5 to 10 seats. Some of the NGOs already have seats on that bus. So some of the bigger NGOs like ICRC and MSF don't require those 5 to 10 seats, but the smaller agencies do. And then when the ceasefire came in, the WHO informed us that the seats would be upped from 25 to 50. And so we were expecting no problems getting in on this convoy. Actually, 44 people applied, and of the 44, only 23 got in. And of the 23, one of them will be a UN worker that just goes to the border with you, that doesn't actually enter Gaza. So of the sort of 22, only 2 that got in were surgeons.
Briefly, if you would, because ideally I want to give you time to respond to COGAT's statement on this. Just remind us about the work that you would have done had you got in.
So this time we were 3 plastic surgeons, because we're plastic and reconstructive surgeons. We're not your average cosmetic plastic surgeons. And we had quite a lot of work already lined up because we've got some colleagues out there, and obviously we're running missions most months. So we knew that we were going to be split up and deployed to 2 hospitals, the European Gaza and the NASA hospital. We had a colleague already working at the European Gaza. He had lined up 4 reconstructive cases for us to do. And we knew that NASA were accepting 2 cases from the north for us to do once we arrived. So that's just word on the ground. We knew we had 6, and they're not sort of, small operations. One was a child that needed its knee resurfacing, and without the surgery, will probably go on now to have an amputation above his knee. The other is a significant hand injury, who again is now likely to lose a couple of fingers on that hand if no plastic surgeon can get in and do the soft tissue cover. So significant injuries.
Clearly, COGAT deny your version of events, saying that the request for the entry of the medical rotation teams was not denied, was processed swiftly within the designated time frame in accordance with the information received from the UN. It should be emphasised that during the processing of the request, the required documents and details were not fully submitted. Consequently, the organisation was informed that the request must be resubmitted along with all necessary supporting documents. Following the resubmission and a professional review, the request was approved in accordance with procedures.
It's a bit difficult to accept that, actually, because obviously this isn't, as I've said, this isn't our first rodeo. We've been going into Gaza since the war for quite a long time, so we know how to submit these documents. As I said, we always get approval from the United Nations and the WHO 2 weeks before we leave the country. So we knew that our paperwork was in order before we left on the 11th of February. I can send you the screenshot that we got back from COGAT, which just lists our names and says denied next to it. So we were denied. And there's a difference between being denied and not allowed entry on that day. So the whole charity was denied on that 11th, and that is an issue that COGAT now have or had with the charity. It took us a lot of time and a lot of work to try and get to the root of what the problem was, and believe it or not, we had a lot of people backing us. Even some of them in the Knesset themselves were trying to lobby on our behalf. Some of our colleagues, our Jewish colleagues, understand that we need to be in Gaza to offer aid, and they were trying to put pressure as well. But we got no information for the week that we were in Gaza. We didn't hear anything back until we had actually landed back in the UK.
Right.
On the 19th, we landed back in the UK. And then on the Friday, the 21st, we had confirmation from the WHO that the denial had been lifted.
So it was lifted when you were back in the UK?
Yeah, once we got back to the UK.
I understand. Yeah, Victoria, I'm out of time. Thank you. I've been, in a word, you're going to try again.
We are. We're trying again in May. So
that's more than a word. I look forward to the update and good luck. I want to read the response from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. We urge all parties to engage constructively in negotiating the subsequent phases of the ceasefire deal to help ensure its full implementation. The UK government has raised the issues of access for medical professionals with the Israeli authorities and continues to reiterate the importance of ensuring access to humanitarian aid. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's probably the 5th best player in last night's supreme LBC quiz team, Tom Swarbrick. But now it's Sheila Fogarty.
I cancelled. That's probably why they won.
It depends who replaced you.
Now listen, I hate to get all bossy.
Yes.
I know. Home.
Yes.
Hydration.
Yes.
Sleep.
Ice pack.
Okay.
All of that. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
James O'Brien on LBC.